I was in chemistry class when the announcement came over the intercom. Active threat. This is not a drill. Initiate lockdown. Everyone froze for a second, then we dove under desks as our teacher ran to lock the door and shut off the lights. I ended up crammed next to Anne, who was already crying. Oh God, she kept saying, her whole body shaking against mine. 3 pops echoed from somewhere in the building, unmistakable for what they were, and Anne grabbed my arm so hard her nails drew blood. My best friend Josh had gym this period in the building where the shots came from, but I couldn't think about that now with 32 of us trapped in this dark classroom. That's real, someone whispered. That's actually real. Anne was texting her mom, her hands shaking, telling her she loved her. I needed to do that. More pops, definitely from inside the building, maybe the first floor. Our classroom was on the 2nd floor with only one exit and nowhere to hide if someone got through that door. My sister says there's a shooter in the gym, the kid next to me whispered, showing his phone screen. She's hiding in the equipment closet. The gym. I texted Josh quickly. Are you okay? But the message didn't deliver. We'd had a stupid fight at lunch about him borrowing my car, and I'd called him pathetic in front of everyone. What if those were the last words I ever said to him? 20 minutes in and we heard footsteps running past our door. Everyone held their breath. The handle rattled and someone let out a sob before we heard, "Police! Stay locked down!" And the footsteps continued. "They'll get him," Anne whispered. "They'll stop him." But the girl in front of us turned around and said, "My boyfriend's in the office. He says the shooter knows the building. He's using service hallways and backstairs the cops don't know about." More shots. Closer this time. Maybe our floor. The walls were so thin we could hear everything, every door being tried, every piece of glass breaking. Someone down the hall was screaming, then suddenly stopped, and the silence was worse than the screaming. "Someone's dead," the girl by the window whispered, reading her phone. "Multiple people shot." "Don't say that," I said, but my voice cracked because the shots kept getting closer and we had nowhere to run. Antonio messaged our group chat. "Has anyone heard from Josh?" "No," 3 people responded. Josh, please be okay." 45 minutes and the sirens were constant, but the shooting hadn't stopped. We could hear it moving through the building like thunder, sometimes distant, sometimes so close we could hear shell casings hit the floor. The fire alarm started blaring, then cut off abruptly, like someone had ripped it from the wall. "He's on the 3rd floor now," someone whispered, reading updates. "Science wing, going room by room." "That's directly above us," Anne said. "He's going to come back down." We could hear movement through the ceiling tiles, deliberate footsteps directly above us, and bits of dust drifted down as the footsteps stopped. It was like he was mapping out the rooms below, planning his route. The girl with the boyfriend kept giving updates. "They're saying he has a list. He's looking for specific people." We heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy and fast, then slow and deliberate. Our hallway. Everyone went completely silent. The footsteps stopped right outside our door. The handle turned, testing it. Someone made a muffled crying sound. The handle turned again, harder, rattling in its frame. Then the footsteps continued and we all exhaled at once. "We're going to die in here," Anne whispered. But after an hour we were still alive, still in total darkness. My legs were cramping from crouching under the desk, but moving seemed more dangerous than pain. Someone said the shooter was wearing a black hoodie and jeans, which described half the school. "He's in the main hallway," the girl with the boyfriend said, moving toward the math wing. The math wing connected to ours. He was coming back. "Turn off your phones," our teacher whispered. "No light, no sound." Complete darkness. I could hear my heartbeat, Anne's ragged breathing, someone praying under their breath, then footsteps getting closer. They stopped at the room next door. A door handle rattled, then breaking glass. We could hear him stepping through, glass crunching under his feet, desks being overturned like he was looking for someone specific. Anne grabbed my hand and squeezed so hard I thought bones might break. The footsteps came closer, stopped right outside our door. The handle turned, locked. A pause. Then 3 loud bangs as something hit the door. The frosted glass window cracked but didn't shatter. We could see a shadow through it, just standing there, waiting. He knew we were in here. He was taking his time. More bangs on the door, harder this time. The glass spiderwebbed. One more hit and he'd be through. The shadow was the right height for a student, not an adult, and something about the posture seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it through the fractured glass. The shadow shifted, raised something toward the glass. This was it. We were going to die in this chemistry classroom. My phone I thought I'd turned off lit up with a text, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the silence. Everyone whispered at me to shut up, but I just stared down at the screen. From Josh. "You shouldn't have said those things at lunch." I looked up at the shadow in the window, at the familiar height, the way the shoulders curved, and realized the black hoodie was the one I'd gotten Josh for his birthday. I stare at the text on my screen, the words blurring as my brain tries to make sense of what I'm seeing. Anne notices the phone light on my face and leans closer, whispering what's wrong. but I can't make my mouth form the words that my best friend since 3rd grade is the person standing outside our door with a gun. My fingers shake so badly I almost dropped the phone twice before I managed to type back to Josh, telling him this isn't him. Please, this isn't who he is, even though the shadow outside the cracked glass proves that's exactly who he became. The 3 dots appear immediately like he was waiting for my response, then disappear, then appear again, and I hold my breath waiting to see what he'll say back to me. The shadow shifts and I hear his footsteps moving away from our door, the sound getting quieter as he heads toward the math wing. And I know from eating lunch with him every day for 6 years that we have maybe 2 minutes before he circles back through the service hallway that connects all the buildings. I make a choice without thinking it through and text Antonio in our group chat, typing as fast as my shaking hands allow that it's Josh. He's wearing a black hoodie. He's moving toward the math wing right now. Forward this to 911 immediately. Antonio replies within seconds with just 2 words, then another message saying he's sending it, and I watch the little status under my message change from delivered to read. Mr. Navarro crawls across the floor toward me, probably ready to take my phone away for having it on during lockdown, but I turn the screen toward him and show him the text exchange with Josh. His face goes completely white in the glow of the screen, all the color draining out like someone pulled a plug. And he looks at me for a long moment before nodding once and whispering that I should keep Josh talking if I can, try to buy time for the police. The fact that my chemistry teacher just told me to negotiate with someone actively shooting people makes me want to throw up right there under the desk. But I swallow hard and type another message asking Josh where he's going, asking him to talk to me. The 3 dots appear and disappear 4 separate times over the next 30 seconds, each time making my heart beat faster because I don't know if he's deciding what to say or deciding whether to come back and shoot through our door. Finally, a message comes through, and I read it 3 times before the words actually make sense in my brain. Coach Henderson is first on his list, then Tyler, who laughed at lunch, then maybe he'll decide about me depending on how he feels. The casual way he lists people like he's telling me his schedule for the day makes him feel like a complete stranger. Someone wearing Josh's face, but not actually Josh at all. I remember Tyler laughing the loudest when I called Josh pathetic in front of everyone at our lunch table. Remember him making jokes about it for the rest of the period. I remember Coach Henderson cutting Josh from JV basketball last month and making some comment about his soft hands in front of the whole team during tryouts. The list makes horrible sense in a way that makes everything worse, because I understand why he picked those names. But that doesn't make it any less scary that my friend spent time writing down who he wanted to hurt, and then brought a gun to the school. More shots echo through the building from the direction Josh was heading, and someone in our classroom starts crying loudly enough that Mr. Navarro has to crawl over and cover their mouth with his hand to keep them quiet. I text Josh again, typing that I'm sorry about lunch, that I was being a jerk and Tyler was worse and I should have stood up for him instead of joining in. I tell him please don't hurt anyone else, please just stop, because maybe if I give him what he wants, then he'll put the gun down. The dots appear again, and I hold my breath so hard my chest starts to hurt, waiting for his response and hoping it means he's not shooting anyone right this second. His next message comes through and it's longer than the others, asking if I really think sorry fixes everything, asking if one apology makes up for 3 years of me getting cooler while he stayed the loser everyone made fun of. I read it twice and realized with a sick feeling in my stomach that this isn't about lunch at all. This is about me making varsity soccer. While he got cut from every team he tried out for, about me dating Emma while he couldn't get anyone to go to homecoming with him, about me having a whole group of friends while he ate lunch alone more days than I ever noticed. I'd been so focused on my own life and my own friends that I never saw Josh drowning right next to me, never noticed him disappearing a little more each day. Police radios crackle somewhere close to our hallway, and I hear someone shout that the suspect is heading toward the athletics offices, which means they got Antonio's message and they're tracking where Josh is going. I text him again asking where he is right now, asking if he's safe, trying to keep him talking like Mr. Navarro said. Josh responds asking since when I care about whether he's safe, and the bitterness in those words hits harder than any of the mean things I said at lunch. I hear footsteps running in the hallway outside, heavy boots that sound like cops or SWAT, and then a single gunshot followed by someone screaming that an officer is down. My whole body goes cold because Josh just shot a cop, which means this doesn't end with him getting help or going to therapy. This ends with him dead or in prison for the rest of his life. Anne grabs my arm again, her nails digging into my skin, and whispers asking if he's really going to kill us. I don't know how to answer because the Josh I knew wouldn't hurt anyone, but that Josh apparently stopped existing somewhere between freshman year and today, replaced by whoever is out in that hallway with a gun. I text him to please just stop, to turn himself in, that this doesn't have to get worse, even though we both know it's already as bad as it possibly gets. The dots appear and disappear over and over for almost a full minute, the longest minute of my entire life, before Josh finally responds asking if I'm still in Mr. Navarro's room, asking if I'm in the second-floor chemistry lab. My blood turns to ice because he's confirming exactly where I am, which means he's still thinking about coming back for me, still deciding whether I'm on his list or not. Mr. Navarro sees the message over my shoulder and immediately starts moving students toward the supply closet in the back corner. the only spot in the whole classroom that doesn't have windows or a direct line from the door. I type back, yes, but please don't come here. The cops are everywhere now. He can't win this. Josh's response comes through almost immediately, saying he's not trying to win. He's just trying to make people feel what he felt. I finally understand that this was never about escape or having some master plan. This is about making us hurt the way he's been hurting, about forcing everyone to see him, even if it's the last thing any of us ever see. I forward his last 3 messages to Antonio, with a note saying to send them to the police, saying Josh is talking about coming to the chemistry lab. Antonio confirms he's already on a call with 911 dispatch, and they're sending units to our floor right now. Heavy boots pound up the stairwell right outside our classroom, and I hear someone shout into a radio about SWAT moving to the 2nd floor. That means they're setting up around where Josh last sent his location, which means they know he's close to us. Navarro waves frantically at students still under desks and points toward the supply closet in the back corner. He's already got 15 people crammed in there, and he's trying to fit more when we hear glass breaking in the classroom next door. Josh is back on our floor. We can hear him breathing hard between the sounds of desks being shoved across tile, like he's searching for someone specific and getting more angry with each empty space. My phone buzzes in my hand, and I look down to see a new text from Josh. It's a photo taken from inside our dark hallway, showing our classroom door with its spider web of cracks spreading across the frosted glass. The caption reads, "I can see your teacher's desk from here. The periodic table poster is crooked, and my stomach drops because he's proving he's right outside, proving he knows exactly where we are and what we can see." I type back with shaking fingers, "That poster's been crooked since September. You helped me hang it for Navarro during lunch detention, remember?" I'm trying to remind him we were friends once, that we used to help each other with stupid stuff like hanging posters and covering for each other when we were late. The 3 dots appear at the bottom of my screen, and they stay there for what feels like forever. Anne is watching my phone over my shoulder, and she whispers asking what he's saying, but I just shake my head because I don't know yet. Finally, Josh's response comes through and it says, "You got detention for spray painting the parking lot. I got detention for being in the wrong place. We were never the same." And he's completely right about that. I was the one who actually broke the rules, who thought it would be funny to paint our class year in huge numbers across 3 parking spaces. Josh just happened to be standing there when the principal came out. I took detention for a week, but Josh took it too because he wouldn't rat me out, and I never thought about how unfair that was until right now. I text back, "You're right. I got away with stuff and you took the blame. That wasn't fair. But this won't fix it." And I watch the message change from sending to delivered. Before Josh can respond, something explodes somewhere close, a sound so loud my ears ring and Anne screams. I hear someone yelling, "Suspect spotted south stairwell," followed by boots running fast and radios crackling with overlapping voices. Josh texts, "Gotta go." Cops finally figured out the back stairs, and the tone is almost joking, like this is just a game of hide and seek instead of him killing people. I type as fast as I can, "Please just give up. I'll visit you. I'll testify you were bullied. I'll do whatever helps. Because maybe if he knows someone will stand up for him in court, he'll stop this." The message shows delivered, but it never changes to read. 3 more gunshots ring out from the direction of the south stairwell, followed by someone screaming, "Shots fired! Officer needs medical." And then a heavy sound like something big hitting the floor. The radio chatter becomes crazy with multiple voices talking over each other about securing a suspect and calling for paramedics and setting up a perimeter. My phone stays completely silent. No new messages from Josh. I don't know if that means they caught him or shot him, or if he's just done talking to me. Anne is crying again next to me, and Navarro is trying to keep everyone quiet in the supply closet. We wait in total darkness for another 10 minutes that feel like 10 hours. Then someone pounds on our door and shouts, "Police! We have the suspect in custody. Prepare for evacuation." But Navarro makes us wait. He crawls to the door and looks through the broken glass, checking for badges and uniforms before he finally unlocks it. 2 SWAT officers in full gear with rifles come in and sweep the room, checking every corner and under every desk before one of them gives us the all-clear signal. They tell us to line up single file for evacuation and to keep our hands visible at all times. We file out into a hallway that looks like a war zone. There's broken glass everywhere crunching under our feet, bullet holes in the walls, dark stains on the floor that I force myself not to look at too closely because I don't want to know if they're blood or something worse. The SWAT team guides us toward the main stairwell, keeping us away from whatever's happening at the south stairs where they caught Josh. Anne grabs my hand and squeezes so tight my fingers go numb, but I don't pull away because I need something to hold on to as much as she does. As we turn the corner toward the stairs, I see them. 4 officers surrounding someone on the ground in a black hoodie with their hands cuffed behind their back. Josh's face is pressed against the tile, and there's blood on his temple, but his eyes are open. They're scanning the hallway like he's still looking for someone. For just a second, our eyes meet across the distance, and I see my best friend looking back at me. He looks scared and broken and so impossibly young lying there in handcuffs. Then an officer steps in front of me and pushes our line forward, blocking my view. The walk down the stairs and through the main hallway feels like it takes forever, even though it's probably only 3 minutes. We pass Coach Henderson's office and I can see paramedics working on someone inside. I force myself not to look because I don't want to know if Josh got the first name on his list. The front doors have been propped open, and sunlight streams in so bright after being in the dark that several students stumble and have to shield their eyes. The parking lot has been completely transformed into a command center. There are ambulances everywhere with their lights flashing, fire trucks, police cars forming a perimeter around the whole school, news vans with satellite dishes already set up along the street. They guide us to a specific area where crisis counselors in bright yellow vests are waiting with blankets and bottles of water. Anne spots her mom in the crowd of parents behind the police tape and starts crying again, but this time it's different. This time it's relief. I pull out my phone and the screen lights up with 17 missed calls from my mom. The texts start with, "Are you okay?" Around the time the lockdown began, and get more frantic with each one. "Please answer," and "Where are you?" and finally, "Please answer. Please be alive." My hands shake as I hit call. She answers before the first ring finishes, and I hear her sobbing so hard she can't form words. I tell her I'm okay, and I'm outside, and I'm safe. My dad's voice cuts in from the background asking if it's really me. I repeat that I'm fine, and they say they're coming to get me, but the police checkpoints are backed up for miles. While I wait, I watch ambulances pull away from the main entrance with their sirens blaring. I count 4 of them before I force myself to stop counting, because each one means someone didn't make it out walking. The girl who was sitting by the window in our classroom stands near the police tape talking to a news reporter. I hear her say we thought we were all going to die before a police officer steps between them and pushes the camera crew back behind the barrier. The parking lot feels like chaos with parents crying and students wrapped in blankets and reporters shouting questions at anyone who will listen. Antonio finds me in the crowd and pulls me into a hug without saying anything. We just stand there holding on to each other because there aren't words for what we just survived. A detective in a dark suit approaches us with a female officer beside him. He introduces himself as Detective Jared Morgan and asks if I'm injured. I shake my head, and he asks if I'm willing to answer some questions about my communications with the suspect. I nod because what else am I going to say? He leads me away from the crisis counselor area toward a big white mobile command unit parked near the fire trucks. Inside, they've set up a temporary interview space with folding chairs and recording equipment on a small table. Detective Morgan gestures for me to sit, and the female officer stands by the door. He asks me to walk through every text exchange with Josh from the moment I realized it was him. My hands shake as I unlock my phone and show him the messages. He photographs each one with his own phone before asking me to email the full thread to an evidence account he writes on a card. He explains that my texts might have saved lives by keeping Josh engaged and helping police track his location through the cell towers. That makes me feel worse instead of better because I was just trying to save myself and everyone in that classroom. I wasn't thinking about being a hero or helping the police. I was terrified and texting the person who was trying to kill us. Detective Morgan asks about my relationship with Josh, and I tell him everything. The lunch fight where I called him pathetic in front of everyone. The years of us drifting apart as I made varsity soccer and got other friends while he ate lunch alone. Coach Henderson cutting him from JV basketball and making that joke about his soft hands. The social isolation I'd been too self-absorbed to notice until it was way too late. He takes notes in a small notebook without any judgment on his face. When I start crying, talking about calling Josh pathetic, he hands me a tissue box and just waits patiently for me to pull myself together. Finally, he asks if Josh ever talked about violence or showed me weapons. I say no, which is the truth, but it feels like a lie because I should have seen something. There should have been warning signs I missed. After the interview, Detective Morgan asks if I consent to having my phone imaged for evidence. I agree because what choice do I have? A tech in a police uniform takes my phone to a van full of computer equipment. He returns it 20 minutes later with instructions not to delete anything. The detective gives me his card and tells me I'll probably need to testify eventually. He thanks me for my cooperation and lets me go find my parents. My mom and dad are waiting right outside the command unit. My mom grabs me so hard I can barely breathe, and my dad keeps touching my face like he's checking I'm real and solid. They ask if I'm hurt, and I say no, even though I don't think I'll ever feel not hurt again. We walk to their car past news cameras and other parents still waiting for their kids. I wonder how many students won't be walking out, how many parents will drive home with empty car seats. The drive home is silent except for my mom's occasional sobs from the passenger seat. My dad keeps looking at me in the rearview mirror like I might disappear if he looks away. When we pull into our driveway, I see our neighbors standing on their porch watching us. I realize this is going to be my life now. Being the kid who was in the shooting. Being the kid whose best friend did it. My phone buzzes constantly with texts from people I haven't talked to in months, all asking if I'm okay. Inside the house, I head straight for my room, but my parents stop me. They say they want me where they can see me. We sit in the living room with the TV on mute showing aerial footage of our school surrounded by emergency vehicles. The news banner scrolls names of confirmed casualties at the bottom of the screen. I see Coach Henderson listed as deceased. Then Tyler Morrison, who sat 2 rows behind me in English. Josh got 2 people on his list before they stopped him. My phone rings and it's Antonio asking if I've seen the group chat. I open it to find complete chaos. People arguing about whether we should have fought back. People sharing videos they took during the lockdown. People blaming Josh's parents and the school and bullying and gun laws and everything except Josh himself. Someone posts asking if anyone else knew Josh was planning this. 3 people respond tagging me and asking if I knew since we were best friends. I stare at their messages and feel sick because now everyone thinks I might have known. Like I could have stopped this if I'd just paid more attention or been a better friend or done literally anything different. I opened the group chat again and my fingers shook as I typed back. I didn't know anything. I'm as shocked as everyone else. But even as I hit send, the words felt wrong, like I was defending myself when 2 people were dead. Someone named Clark, who I barely knew from gym class, responded immediately, "But you were texting him during the shooting." What did he say? 3 more people jumped in asking the same thing, and I watched the messages pile up faster than I could read them. Sarah from English asked if Josh had seemed different lately, and Miguel wanted to know if I'd seen warning signs, and suddenly everyone was treating me like I should have known, like I could have stopped this if I'd just paid better attention. My phone buzzed with notification after notification, and I couldn't breathe looking at all those questions and accusations. I closed the group chat without responding again and held down the power button until my phone went black. The silence in the living room felt heavy after all that buzzing, and I realized my hands were still shaking. My mom was watching me from across the room, and I could see she wanted to ask what was wrong, but she didn't say anything. An hour later, my mom called us to dinner, even though none of us wanted to eat. We sat at the kitchen table with plates of pasta that my mom had made on autopilot, the same meal she always made when she didn't know what else to do. I pushed a meatball around my plate and watched the red sauce make patterns on the white ceramic. My dad cut his spaghetti into smaller and smaller pieces, but never actually put any in his mouth. My mom took one bite and then just held her fork in the air like she'd forgotten what to do with it. The clock on the wall ticked so loud I wanted to rip it down, and the refrigerator hummed, and outside I could hear a car drive past our house. Finally, my dad put down his fork and looked at me. "Do you want to talk about it?" I shook my head because how could I explain any of this? How do I tell my parents that my best friend killed Coach Henderson, who used to give me rides home from practice? How do I explain that Tyler Morrison is dead, and I'd just seen him in English class yesterday complaining about the homework? How do I make them understand that part of me keeps seeing Josh as the kid who helped me build a treehouse in 5th grade, the kid who came to my birthday parties, and knew all my secrets, instead of the person who brought a gun to the school and shot people? I couldn't find words for any of it, so I just shook my head again, and my dad nodded like he understood, even though nobody could understand this. That night, I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Josh's face pressed against the hallway floor, with his hands cuffed behind his back. I heard the gunshots echoing through the building, and Anne's panicked breathing next to me under the desk, and the sound of glass breaking as Josh moved through the classrooms looking for people on his list. My brain kept replaying the moment our eyes met when the police were leading me past him, and I saw my best friend looking back at me scared and broken and so young. I rolled over and checked my clock, and it was only 11:30, even though it felt like I'd been lying there for hours. I tried counting backwards from 100 like my mom taught me when I was little, and couldn't sleep, but I kept losing count around 70. At midnight, I heard my parents talking in low voices down the hall, and then their door closing. At 1:15, I heard a siren go past our house, and my whole body tensed up thinking about ambulances and police cars surrounding the school. At 2 a.m., I gave up on sleeping and went downstairs as quietly as I could. My dad was sitting on the couch in the dark living room with the TV on mute showing news coverage of the shooting. Aerial shots of our school surrounded by emergency vehicles and crime scene tape. Photos of Coach Henderson and Tyler that their families must have given to the news stations. My dad looked up when I came down the stairs, and he didn't seem surprised to see me. He patted the couch next to him, and I sat down, and we both stared at the TV without saying anything. A reporter was standing in front of the school talking into a microphone, and the caption said something about the suspect being held without bail. They showed a picture of Josh from the yearbook, from before everything went wrong, when he still smiled in photos. My dad reached over and muted the TV completely, so we sat in total silence watching the images flash across the screen. The sun started coming up around 6 a.m., turning the sky outside our window from black to gray to pale orange. My dad finally spoke and asked if I wanted breakfast, but I shook my head. We just sat there together as the morning light filled the room and the news coverage continued on the silent TV. The next morning, my mom came downstairs and found us both still on the couch. She'd been crying again. I could tell from her red eyes and the tissue she was holding. She turned on her phone and read something, and then told us the school district had announced classes were canceled for the rest of the week. Crisis counselors would be available at the community center starting this afternoon for any students who needed to talk. She looked at me and said she thought I should go, even though I really didn't want to face anyone from the school. I started to argue, but she just shook her head and said it wasn't up for discussion. She said I needed to talk to someone professional about what I'd been through, and she was right, even if I didn't want to admit it. My dad offered to drive me, and I nodded because I didn't trust myself to drive after not sleeping. We got in the car around noon, and the community center parking lot was already packed with cars and news vans when we arrived. I saw students from the school walking in with their parents, and everyone had the same shell-shocked look on their faces. Some kids were crying, and some just stared straight ahead like zombies. I recognized Emma from my English class walking in with her mom, and Antonio's car was parked near the entrance. Inside the community center, they'd transformed the gymnasium into a crisis counseling area, with folding tables set up as stations and different counselors sitting at each one. Someone gave my dad a clipboard with forms to fill out, and we sat in plastic chairs against the wall waiting our turn. The room smelled like industrial cleaner, and there were too many people talking in low voices. A woman called my name after about 20 minutes and introduced herself as Cecilia Roberts. She had kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she didn't look at me with pity or suspicion, just patience. She led me to a private office down the hall away from all the noise and gestured for me to sit in a comfortable chair while she sat across from me. She didn't push me to talk right away, just waited while I stared at my hands. Finally, she asked me to tell her what I was feeling, and I said guilty because that was the only word that made sense. She asked what I felt guilty about, and I started listing everything. The fight at lunch where I called Josh pathetic in front of everyone. Not noticing that Josh was in pain and planning something terrible. Texting him during the shooting instead of just staying silent. Surviving when Coach Henderson and Tyler didn't. Being Josh's friend all these years and never seeing this coming. The list kept growing, and I realized I felt guilty about basically everything. Cecilia listened to my whole story without interrupting once. I told her about growing up with Josh and how we'd been best friends since elementary school. I told her about how we'd drifted apart in high school when I made varsity soccer and started dating Emma and had other friends while Josh got more and more isolated. I told her about the lunch fight and calling him pathetic and how Tyler had laughed the loudest. I told her about being under the desk in chemistry class and getting Josh's text and realizing my best friend was the shooter. I told her about texting him trying to keep him talking and forwarding messages to Antonio, who sent them to 911. I told her about seeing Josh on the floor in handcuffs and the look in his eyes. When I finally stopped talking, Cecilia was quiet for a minute, and then she said something that surprised me. You didn't pull the trigger. Josh made his own choices. Your words at lunch were unkind, but they didn't cause this. She explained that school shooters plan their actions over time, sometimes for weeks or months. They look for justifications and excuses, but the decision to bring a gun and hurt people is entirely their own. She said if it wasn't my insult at lunch, it would have been something else because Josh was already on that path. I wanted to believe her, but the guilt still sat in my chest like a heavy stone that wouldn't move. We spent the next 30 minutes working on grounding techniques for when I started panicking. Cecilia taught me to focus on 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear, 2 things I could smell, and 1 thing I could taste. She said this would help pull me back to the present when my brain started replaying the shooting. She gave me a journal and told me to write down thoughts I couldn't say out loud, especially the scary or confusing ones. She explained that trauma responses were completely normal, and I shouldn't be surprised if I had nightmares or trouble concentrating or sudden crying spells or anger outbursts. She said healing wasn't linear, and some days would be harder than others. Before I left, she scheduled me for twice-weekly sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and gave me her emergency number in case I needed to talk between appointments. She walked me back to the waiting room where my dad was filling out insurance paperwork, and she shook his hand and told him I was very brave. Outside the community center, a reporter spotted me and started walking over with a cameraman following behind. She had perfectly styled blonde hair and too much makeup and a microphone with a news station logo on it. She called out asking if I could comment on my friendship with the shooter. My dad immediately stepped between us and told her to back off, but she kept calling out questions. Did you have any warning signs? Do you feel responsible for not stopping him? My dad put his arm around my shoulders and guided me toward our car, while the reporter kept shouting questions. I kept my head down and walked faster and tried not to cry, because I didn't want to give them footage of me breaking down. We got in the car, and my dad locked the doors, and I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. My phone buzzed with a text from Antonio. Don't talk to reporters. They're trying to make us look bad for not stopping him. I texted back that I hadn't said anything, and he sent a thumbs-up emoji. That evening, my parents asked if I wanted to go to the vigil at the town park for Coach Henderson and Tyler. I said yes because it felt like something I should do, even though I was scared of facing their families. We drove to the park around 7 p.m., and it was already packed with students holding candles and photos of the victims. Someone had set up a table with flowers and teddy bears and cards. Tyler's girlfriend Jessica was standing near the front, sobbing so hard she could barely stand, and 2 of her friends were holding her up. Coach Henderson's wife was sitting in a wheelchair looking completely broken, and their adult daughter stood behind her with her hands on her mother's shoulders. The principal gave a speech about loss and community and healing, but I couldn't really focus on the words. People were crying everywhere I looked, and the candles created little pools of light in the growing darkness. I stood at the back of the crowd trying to be invisible, but I saw people pointing at me and whispering. A woman I didn't know walked over, and I could see anger in her eyes before she even opened her mouth. Are you the one who was texting with him? When I nodded, she asked if I tried to stop him. I said yes because I had tried. I'd texted him and kept him talking and forwarded messages to the police. But she just shook her head and walked away like my answer wasn't good enough, like I should have done more somehow. I realized standing there in the park that some people would always blame me for not stopping Josh. They would always wonder if I could have prevented this if I'd just been a better friend, or noticed the warning signs, or said the right thing at lunch. I would probably always wonder the same thing. Crowd and candles created this weird moving light that made everyone's faces look strange and unfamiliar. I left before the speeches ended because I couldn't handle another person asking me questions or looking at me like I was either a hero or a failure. My parents drove me home in silence, and I went straight to my room and stayed there for the rest of the weekend. On Monday morning, Detective Morgan called to remind me about the preliminary hearing on Wednesday. He said I needed to wear something nice and be at the courthouse by 9. My mom took me shopping for dress pants and a button-up shirt that felt wrong on my body, like I was playing dress-up for something serious. Tuesday night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept thinking about facing Josh in court and having to read our texts out loud and explaining to a room full of strangers why I didn't stop my best friend from killing people. Wednesday morning arrived too fast. My dad drove me to the courthouse, and the parking lot was already packed with news vans and protesters holding signs. Some signs said things like justice for the victims, and others said mental health, not jail time. We had to push through a crowd of reporters shouting questions at us. My dad kept his hand on my back, guiding me toward the entrance. Inside the courthouse, Detective Morgan met us and walked us to a witness waiting room. He explained that I would be called to testify after they established the basic facts of the case. The room had uncomfortable chairs and old magazines and a water cooler that made weird gurgling sounds. We waited for almost 2 hours before someone came to get me. The bailiff led me down a long hallway to the courtroom doors. He told me to wait until they called my name. I could hear muffled voices inside, and my hands started shaking so badly I had to shove them in my pockets. Then the door opened and the bailiff nodded at me. I walked into a courtroom packed with people. Josh's parents sat in the front row on one side. Coach Henderson's wife was in a wheelchair on the other side with Tyler's parents next to her. I recognized students from the school scattered throughout the gallery. Reporters filled the back rows with notebooks and recording devices. Josh sat at the defense table wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look small and young, and nothing like the person who shot up our school. His lawyer sat next to him in an expensive-looking suit. Josh's eyes found mine as I walked down the aisle, and I saw fear in them. The bailiff directed me to the witness stand. I put my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Sitting down, I could feel everyone staring at me. Some people looked sympathetic. Others looked angry. I couldn't tell which reaction was worse. The prosecutor stood up and introduced herself. She asked me to state my name for the record. Then she asked how I knew Josh. I explained we had been best friends since elementary school. We used to build forts in my backyard and ride bikes to the convenience store and play video games until late at night. But in high school, we drifted apart. I made the soccer team. Josh got cut from basketball. I started dating and going to parties. Josh ate lunch alone most days. The prosecutor asked me to describe our relationship on the day of the shooting. I told her about the fight at lunch. Josh wanted to borrow my car. I said no because he still owed me money from last time. He got upset and I called him pathetic in front of everyone. Tyler and some other guys laughed. Josh just walked away without saying anything. The prosecutor pulled out printed copies of our text messages. She asked me to read them out loud. I read Josh's first text. "You shouldn't have said those things at lunch." Then my response. "Josh, please, this isn't you." His next message. "Coach Henderson, then that jerk Tyler from lunch, then maybe I'll decide about you." The courtroom was completely silent as I read. My voice cracked on some of the words. The prosecutor asked what I was thinking when I sent my responses. I said I was terrified and trying to keep him talking. I thought if I could keep him on his phone, then maybe he wouldn't hurt more people. I forwarded his messages to Antonio, who sent them to the police. I was hoping they could use the information to find him faster. The prosecutor asked if I thought my texts helped. I said I didn't know. Maybe they bought some time. Maybe they helped the police track his location. Or maybe I should have said something different that would have made him stop. She told me I did the right thing and thanked me for my testimony. Then the defense attorney stood up. He was older, with gray hair and a kind face that didn't match what he was about to do. He asked if Josh had ever been violent before that day. I said no. He asked if Josh had ever threatened anyone. I said no. He asked if Josh had been bullied. I said yes. By who, he asked. I listed names including Tyler Morrison and some guys on the basketball team. He asked if I had ever bullied Josh. I wanted to say no, but I was under oath. I said yes at lunch the day of the shooting. He asked what I said. I repeated the word pathetic and watched Josh's mom start crying in the gallery. The defense attorney asked if I knew about Josh's mental health struggles. I said I knew he seemed sad lately, but I didn't know the details. He asked if I thought Josh was mentally stable on the day of the shooting. The prosecutor jumped up and objected. The judge sustained the objection. The defense attorney smiled like he had made his point anyway. He thanked me and sat down. The judge told me I could step down. My legs shook so badly walking back to my seat that I almost tripped. My dad grabbed my arm to steady me. The rest of the hearing continued with other witnesses and evidence, but I couldn't focus on any of it. After about an hour, the judge called a recess. Everyone stood as the judge left. I walked out into the hallway needing air. Olive Nolan was standing near the water fountain. When she saw me, she walked over. She thanked me for being honest up there. She said I didn't try to make Josh look worse than he was. She explained that the lawyer was building a case that Josh had a mental break and wasn't in control of his actions. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to believe it was true. The Josh I grew up with wouldn't have done this if he was thinking clearly. But another part of me knew he had planned it. He made a list. He brought a gun. He knew exactly what he was doing, even if he was in pain. Olive touched my arm gently and said she didn't blame me for testifying. Then she walked back into the courtroom. After the recess, the judge returned and announced his ruling. There was enough evidence for trial. He set a court date for 3 months away. Josh was denied bail. He would stay in juvenile detention until he turned 18 in 2 months, then transfer to county jail. The bailiff told Josh to stand. They put handcuffs on him right there in the courtroom. As they led him toward the side door, he looked back at me one more time. His lips moved, forming the words, "I'm sorry," but no sound came out. I didn't know if he meant sorry for the shooting or sorry for dragging me into this, or sorry for our friendship ending this way. Then he was gone through the door. The next day back at the school, everything felt different. Some kids came up to me in the hallway saying I was brave for testifying. Others whispered and pointed and turned away when I looked at them. By lunch, someone had spray-painted the word snitch across my locker in red paint. The principal called me to the office. She said they were reviewing security footage to find who did it. She asked if I felt safe at the school. I said I didn't know. She assigned me a different locker and said to report any threats immediately. Antonio and Anne found me after school. They said people were choosing sides about whether Josh deserved sympathy or punishment. Some students thought I betrayed him by helping the prosecution. Others thought I did what I had to do. Antonio said to ignore all of it. Anne said she was proud of me for telling the truth. But I could feel friendships cracking apart around me. People I used to eat lunch with suddenly had other plans. Kids I studied with stopped texting back. The shooting had divided our school into camps, and I was stuck in the middle. That week in therapy, Cecilia asked how I felt about testifying. I said guilty. She asked why. I explained that I helped prosecute my former best friend. I read his texts out loud in court. I admitted I bullied him. Now he was going to prison, partly because of my testimony. Cecilia leaned forward and said something that surprised me. She said I could acknowledge Josh's pain and mental health struggles while still holding him accountable for his choices. Both things could be true at the same time. He was suffering and he killed people. He was bullied and he made a choice to bring a gun to the school. My words at lunch were cruel, and they didn't cause the shooting. She said I needed to separate what I was responsible for from what Josh was responsible for. I was responsible for being a bad friend sometimes. Josh was responsible for murder. Over the next few weeks, Detective Morgan called several times to prepare me for the actual trial. He said the defense would argue Josh was bullied into a mental breakdown. My testimony about our friendship and the lunch fight would be important. The prosecutor wanted me to emphasize that Josh planned the attack. He had a list of targets. He used service hallways the police didn't know about. He texted me about his plans. All of that showed thinking ahead, not a spontaneous break. Detective Morgan said I needed to be ready for hard questions from both sides. 2 days before the trial started, Josh's lawyer called my house. My dad answered, and I could hear him getting angry. The lawyer was asking if I would testify for the defense about Josh's mental state and the bullying he experienced. My dad said absolutely not and hung up. But I thought about it. Part of me wanted people to understand that Josh wasn't a monster. He was a broken kid who made terrible, unforgivable choices. He was my best friend who I watched slowly fall apart while I was too busy with my own life to notice. But I also knew he killed Coach Henderson and Tyler Morrison. He shot at police. He traumatized hundreds of students. In the end, I decided I could only testify to what I saw and let the lawyers argue about what it meant. The trial started on a Monday and lasted 3 days. The courtroom was even more packed than the preliminary hearing. I testified on the second day for almost 4 hours. The prosecutor asked detailed questions about Josh's behavior leading up to the shooting. Did he seem depressed? Yes. Did he talk about weapons? Number. Did he mention the people he targeted? Not directly, but I knew he was angry at them. The defense attorney asked about the bullying in detail. He made me describe every mean thing I said to Josh over the years, every time I chose other friends over him, every party I went to without inviting him. He asked if I thought Josh felt invisible at the school. I said probably yes. He asked if I thought Josh felt like he had no other way to be seen. The prosecutor objected. The judge allowed it. I said I didn't know what Josh was thinking. I only knew what he did. Then they had me read the texts again. This time, the prosecutor asked me to explain what each message revealed about Josh's planning. I pointed out that he knew where I was. He knew the building layout. He had specific targets. He was tracking police movements. All of that required thinking ahead. The defense attorney asked if fear and trauma could cause someone to think ahead while still being in a mental health crisis. I said I didn't know. I wasn't a doctor. The jury listened to everything carefully. Some of them took notes. Others just stared at Josh or at me. I couldn't tell what they were thinking. When I finally stepped down, my shirt was soaked with sweat, and my throat hurt from talking so much. My dad drove me home, and I slept for 12 hours straight. The next morning, my dad drove me back to the courthouse for the verdict. The jury had been out for 6 hours, and everyone said that was a bad sign for Josh because quick verdicts usually mean not guilty, and long ones mean the jury is convinced but working through the details. We sat in the same courtroom as before with Josh at the defense table in his orange jumpsuit, looking smaller than I remembered. The judge came in and asked if the jury had reached a verdict, and the foreman stood up and said yes, they had. The clerk read the charges one by one, and after each one, the foreman said guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder for Coach Henderson, guilty of first-degree murder for Tyler Morrison, guilty of attempted murder of a police officer, guilty on all the other charges too, every single one. Josh didn't move or react at all, just stared straight ahead like he was watching something far away that nobody else could see. But behind him in the gallery, Olive Nolan made a sound like all the air got punched out of her lungs and collapsed forward, sobbing, so hard the bailiff had to help her stay in her seat. The judge thanked the jury and dismissed them, then set a sentencing hearing for 2 weeks later. He said Josh was facing life in prison with possibility of parole after 25 years, and since he'd be 18 by then, he'd go to adult prison, not juvenile. My mom squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I barely felt it because I was watching Josh get led out in handcuffs while his mom cried and the victims' families sat stone-faced in their row. 2 weeks later, we were back for sentencing, and this time the courtroom was even more packed. Coach Henderson's wife went first for the victim impact statements. She talked about their 30 years of marriage and how he'd coached hundreds of kids and how she had to plan his funeral instead of their retirement. She cried the whole time, but kept reading from her paper in this shaky voice that made everyone in the room cry with her. Then Tyler's parents got up and his dad could barely speak, so his mom did most of the talking. She said Tyler wanted to be a teacher and work with kids and he'd never get that chance now. She said they had to bury their son at 17, and that pain would never go away no matter what happened to Josh. The prosecutor stood up after them and asked for the maximum sentence. He said Josh planned the attack, targeted specific people, and showed no remorse until after he got caught. Josh's lawyer argued for leniency because of Josh's age and mental health issues. He said Josh had been bullied and isolated and reached a breaking point, and that he deserved a chance at rehabilitation someday. Then the judge looked at Josh and asked if he wanted to speak. Josh stood up slowly and pulled out a piece of paper that shook in his hands. He read from it in this quiet voice that barely carried to the back of the room. He said he was sorry to the victims' families, and he thought about what he did every single day. He said he was in a dark place and made terrible choices, but he knew that didn't excuse anything. He said he hoped someday he could do something meaningful with his life to honor the people he hurt. His voice cracked multiple times while he read, and by the end he was crying, so hard he could barely get the words out. The judge let him finish and sit down, then took a few minutes to review his notes before speaking. He sentenced Josh to 40 years in prison with possibility of parole after 25 years. Josh didn't react to that either, just nodded once like he'd been expecting it. They let him out, and this time he looked at me as he passed and mouthed something I couldn't understand. After the sentencing, I sat in my dad's car in the courthouse parking lot, feeling this weird mix of relief and sadness. Justice had been served like everyone kept saying, but Coach Henderson and Tyler were still dead. Josh would spend most of his life in prison, but that didn't erase the trauma for me or Anne or anyone else who survived. Detective Morgan found me before we left and told me I did the right thing by testifying. He said my cooperation helped ensure accountability, and I should be proud of that. I thanked him, but I didn't feel proud or like a hero. I just felt tired and sad and ready for everything to be over, even though I knew it never really would be. In the weeks after the trial, I tried to focus on moving forward. I went back to my twice-weekly sessions with Cecilia, and we worked on accepting that I did everything I could during the shooting and afterward. She kept saying I couldn't have prevented Josh's choices no matter what I did or said. I helped minimize the harm by keeping him engaged and sharing information with police. She made me repeat this thing about how carrying appropriate responsibility is different from carrying crushing guilt. The guilt wanted me to believe I caused the shooting by calling Josh pathetic at lunch. The responsibility meant acknowledging I said something mean, but understanding Josh made his own choice to bring a gun to the school. Some days I believed her, and some days the guilt won. Anne and I ended up growing closer through everything we'd been through together. We started studying together after school and talking about our fears and triggers. She was seeing her own therapist, and sometimes we'd compare notes about coping strategies that worked or didn't work. The weird thing was we'd barely known each other before the shooting, and now she was one of the only people who really understood what it felt like. Sometimes we'd go sit in the chemistry lab after school just to prove to ourselves we could be in that room without panicking. Mr. Navarro would let us stay as long as we needed and never ask questions or made it weird. He'd just work at his desk grading papers while we sat there breathing through the anxiety until it got manageable. Antonio organized this group of survivors who started meeting weekly at the community center. There were 12 of us total who'd been in the lockdown or directly affected by the shooting. We didn't have any formal agenda or structure, just showed up and shared how we were doing and supported each other through the hard days. Some days we talked about the shooting and processed what happened. Other days we deliberately talked about anything else, movies or sports or college plans, because we needed to remember we were more than just survivors. The group became this lifeline for all of us, the one place we could be completely honest about struggling without people telling us to move on or get over it. 6 weeks after the sentencing, the school held a memorial dedication ceremony. They'd installed this garden in the courtyard with 2 benches that had Coach Henderson's and Tyler's names engraved on them. The principal gave a speech about resilience and community and honoring their memory by being kind to each other. Tyler's sister planted a tree in the garden and could barely get through it without breaking down. Coach Henderson's wife donated new equipment to the athletics program in his name. It was sad, but also healing in this weird way to honor them publicly and have a physical place to remember them. A few days after the ceremony, I got a letter forwarded through Detective Morgan from Josh in prison. He wrote that he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again, but he wanted me to know he was getting mental health treatment and working on understanding why he did what he did. He said he thought about our friendship often and wished he had talked to me about his pain instead of letting it build into rage. He didn't ask for forgiveness or anything like that, just said he hoped someday I could remember the good times we had without them being poisoned by what he became. I read the letter 3 times sitting on my bed trying to figure out how I felt about it. I ended up filing it away in my desk drawer, not ready to respond but not ready to throw it away either. As the school year finally ended, I realized I'd survived something I never thought I could survive. I still had hard days where loud noises made me panic, or I'd dream about being trapped under that desk listening to gunshots. But I also had good days where I laughed with friends and focused on homework and actually thought about the future without it feeling impossible. Cecilia said this is what healing looks like, not forgetting what happened or being unchanged by it, but learning to carry the experience without letting it crush you. I didn't know if I believed that yet, but I was trying. Anne and I filled out college applications together at the library, both of us picking schools within an hour of each other, because neither of us wanted to be alone after everything. Antonio got accepted to a state school 3 hours away, but we made him promise to visit and stay in the group chat no matter what. The survivors group met one last time before summer, and we talked about starting chapters at our colleges to help other students dealing with trauma. Someone suggested we could do presentations about what helped us heal and what didn't, turn our experience into something that might prevent other people from suffering alone like Josh did. Cecilia sat in on that meeting and told us she was proud of how we were channeling our pain into helping others, that this kind of purpose-driven healing was powerful and lasting. On the last day of school, I got there early and walked through the empty hallways before anyone else arrived. The memorial garden in the courtyard had flowers blooming around Coach Henderson's and Tyler's benches, their names etched in metal that would last longer than any of us. The bullet holes in the hallway walls had been patched and painted over, but I could still see exactly where they were, could still hear the sounds that made them. I stopped outside the chemistry lab and looked through the window at the desks arranged differently than they were that day, at Mr. Navarro setting up for his first period class like it was any normal morning. I thought about Josh sitting in a prison cell, and Coach Henderson who never got to retire, and Tyler who never got to graduate, and all of us survivors carrying scars nobody could see. I couldn't change what happened or take back the fight at lunch or erase Josh's choices or bring back the people he killed. But I could choose how I moved forward from here. I could remember that I tried to help during the lockdown, that I told the truth in court, that I was working on healing even when it felt impossible. I could believe that someday the weight would feel lighter and the nightmares would come less often, and I could think about building tree houses with Josh without it being poisoned by what he became. Standing in that hallway, I chose hope even though it was hard, because the alternative was letting one terrible day define the rest of my life, and I refused to give it that power.
My mom thought she could replace my father with her creepy new boyfriend and make me call him Dad, but she didn't realize I still had contact with my actual dad. I was 13 when my mother got engaged to Brandon. Dad had been convicted for manslaughter 5 months ago. He called someone at the bar, but he wasn't even drinking. I was there with him. He went into the bathroom, then came out minutes later looking panicked and covered in blood. He shouted for someone to call the police, and they arrived quickly. But then without saying much, they put him in handcuffs and took him away. The next time I saw him was behind bars. It never made much sense though. Dad never had a violent bone in his body. He swore he didn't do it. And the way Mom acted after his conviction made me even more suspicious. She brought home Brandon instantly. On day 1, she said he was my new dad since the other one was clearly a monster, and told me that my dad was a killer who I needed to distance from for my own safety. I wasn't sure what to believe at first, but when 5 months later my mom announced to me that they were engaged and I needed to start calling Brandon Daddy, I became quite convinced of Dad's innocence. Around this time is also when it started. Brandon got comfortable. He began staring at me while eating slowly, saying things like, "You're growing up so fast, becoming such a pretty young woman." The worst part was my mom thought it was sweet. Even when I told my mom for the first time that Brandon made my skin crawl, she told me I was dramatic. She must have told him what I said though, because that night while she slept, Brandon came into my room, and he grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks and said, "You know what happens to naughty girls who snitch." I was terrified, but I knew I couldn't trust my mom by telling her, so I kept it a secret. I also started keeping a different secret around this time. I started writing letters to Dad. I'd hide them between my textbook pages and mail them from my friend's house after school. Dad would write back through the prison email system to an account I created without Mom knowing. Things got really bad one specific Thursday, though. I came home from school one day to find out Mom had changed my last name on all school records to Brandon's without telling me. "You'll thank me when you're older," she said. That night, Brandon came into my room to celebrate being a real family now, and sat on my bed. He put his hand on my thigh and said I should be grateful to have a dad who cares. I pushed him off and locked myself in the bathroom until he left. I remember writing to Dad about that incident. The letter I got back from him was on real paper this time, and parts of it were damp and see-through, almost as if he had cried while writing it. That almost broke me. But luckily there was one thing I looked forward to, the chance to see him. His birthday was coming up, and I remember enthusiastically asking Mom if I could visit him. I told her I knew she didn't like him, but it was his birthday, just today, and for a few minutes. "Please," I said. But of course I got told no. Actually, I got told something even worse. Mom said we couldn't go because that exact weekend Brandon coincidentally had car show tickets and expected us all to go together. He specifically requested us to have adjoining hotel rooms. When I told them I'd rather visit Dad, Mom exploded. "He's a killer! You're not visiting a murderer!" When I said, "He's innocent and he's still my dad," Brandon backhanded me across the face while Mom watched. She said nothing. I was forced to go with them that weekend, and while I was sleeping, the worst happened. Brandon snuck in, he was drunk, and this time he didn't restrain himself to just a thigh grab. His hand went all the way. I had never felt so disgusting and humiliated. I remember traveling home broken. And to make matters even worse, the week we came home, my mom found the hidden letters from Dad I had been hiding. She burned them in the backyard, and as punishment for communicating with him, she took my bedroom door off its hinges for monitoring. Of course, Brandon took this as an opportunity. He would stand in the doorway at night watching me sleep. I remember that was a real breaking point of mine. I remember sneaking off into the school library past hours the next day to email DDA. I must have sent an hour-long email that made no sense because I just rambled about everything. I didn't know what I expected, if I even wanted anything because I was so numb. But then 2 weeks later, I got a reply from him. It was lengthy, super lengthy, telling me all the right things and how everything was going to be okay. But there was one thing that stuck out. "Did you check where I said?" I became confused. Check where? I started going through every single email he had ever sent me, and that's when I found it. In one of the more recent emails, Dad had told me to go up to the attic and behind the radiator. I remember reading that email the day after asking my mom if I could go visit him. I think I was too heartbroken to read thoroughly, and somehow missed it. Either way, I made a big-time mental note of what Dad said, and waited until Mom and Brandon went on date night. That happened next week. My hands shook climbing into the attic with a flashlight, and behind the radiator, I found a plastic-wrapped journal. I opened it to the marked page Dad told me to. It was dated weeks before Dad's arrest, and in Dad's handwriting it said, "It's been a few weeks since I caught Lauren and Brandon sneaking off into the bar. I don't know how to confront her." I was shocked, taken aback, and that's when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway that made my blood run cold. They were back early. The restaurant must have been too crowded, or maybe they'd had a fight. I could hear car doors slamming and Mom's heels clicking on the walkway. My heart pounded as I clutched the journal to my chest, knowing I had only seconds to decide what to do. I heard Brandon's heavy footsteps on the stairs, each creak of the old wood sending a jolt through my chest. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the flashlight, its beam dancing wildly across the dusty attic floorboards. I shoved the journal under my shirt, the leather cover cold against my skin, and scrambled toward the attic opening, but I was too slow. Brandon's head appeared through the hole just as I reached the ladder, his dark eyes immediately locking onto mine. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Then he climbed up the rest of the way, his broad shoulders barely fitting through the opening. I backed up against the wall, feeling the rough wood press into my spine, the journal pressing against my stomach under my shirt. He looked around the attic slowly, deliberately, taking in the disturbed dust that hung in the air like tiny ghosts, the moved boxes near the radiator where I'd found Dad's hidden things. He asked what I was doing up here, his voice calm, but with an edge that made my skin crawl. I told him I was looking for my old stuffed animals from when I was little, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't believe me. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands flexed at his sides. He stepped closer, and I could smell the wine on his breath from dinner, mixed with his cologne that Mom said was expensive but always made me feel sick. He said I was a terrible liar, just like my father. The words hit me like a slap. Then he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise, and yanked me toward the ladder. I had to use my other hand to keep the journal from falling out of my shirt, pressing it tight against my body. Mom was waiting at the bottom of the ladder, her arms crossed and foot tapping impatiently. She looked annoyed, asking why I was sneaking around like some kind of thief in my own house. Brandon told her I was probably hiding something, his hand still gripping my arm possessively. He suggested they search my room, and I saw a flash of something dark in his eyes. I panicked and said I just wanted to find my old teddy bear because I couldn't sleep without my door. The words tumbled out too fast, too desperate. Mom rolled her eyes but seemed to buy it, probably because she was tired and didn't want to deal with more drama. That night I waited until I heard them both snoring, Brandon's deep rumble mixing with Mom's softer breathing. The house settled into its nighttime creaks and groans as I carefully hid the journal inside my pillowcase, feeling the corners dig into my cheek when I lay down. I couldn't risk reading more with Brandon checking on me every hour, his shadow appearing in my doorway like clockwork. The next morning was Saturday. Mom made pancakes like nothing had happened, humming off-key to some song on the radio. The normalcy of it made my stomach turn. Brandon kept staring at me across the table, his eyes following every movement as I pushed food around my plate. I excused myself to use the bathroom and took the journal with me, hiding it in the tank of the toilet wrapped in a plastic bag I found under the sink. The water was cold on my arms as I carefully placed it inside. At school on Monday, I snuck into the computer lab during lunch, telling my friends I had to finish an assignment. The room was empty except for the hum of old computers and the tick of the wall clock. I started taking photos of each page of the journal with my phone, angling it to avoid the glare from the fluorescent lights. My hands were still shaking, making some photos blurry. The entries went back years, Dad's familiar handwriting becoming more frantic as time went on. Dad wrote about his suspicions, about seeing Brandon's car at weird hours parked down the street, about Mom acting strange and distant. One entry mentioned finding a receipt for a motel in Mom's purse when he was looking for gum. Another talked about Brandon showing up at the bar during Dad's shifts, always watching from a corner booth, always lurking like a predator studying its prey. I uploaded everything to a cloud account I made with a fake name, my heart pounding as the progress bar slowly filled. Then I deleted the photos from my phone, checking twice to make sure they were really gone. I knew Brandon might check it. He'd been going through my things more lately. When I got home that day, he was waiting in my room, sitting on my bed like he owned the place. He'd gone through everything. My drawers were dumped out, clothes scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. My mattress was flipped, the box spring exposed. Even my old jewelry box was emptied, cheap necklaces and friendship bracelets tangled together. He asked where it was, his voice dangerously quiet. I played dumb, asking what he was talking about, trying to look confused instead of terrified. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me hard, my teeth clicking together. He said he knew I found something in the attic, that he wasn't stupid. Mom came home then, her keys jingling as she called out hello. She asked what was going on, surveying the destruction of my room with raised eyebrows. Brandon smoothly lied, his entire demeanor changing in an instant. He said he was helping me reorganize my messy room, that I'd asked for his help. He even smiled, that fake smile that never reached his eyes. She believed him like always, probably because it was easier than asking questions. That night at dinner, Brandon announced they were moving up the wedding. Instead of next year, it would be next month. He said he couldn't wait any longer to make our family official. Mom squealed with excitement, clapping her hands like a child. I felt sick, the chicken on my plate suddenly looking gray and unappetizing. Over the next few weeks, Brandon watched me constantly. He installed a camera in the hallway pointing at where my door used to be, the red light blinking at me like an evil eye. He started driving me to and from school, no more bus with my friends. He'd wait in the parking lot, engine running, watching everyone who talked to me. He took my phone at night, placing it on his nightstand where I couldn't reach it. But I kept working during the day. I printed pages from the journal at school and hid them in my locker, taping them behind old textbooks. I needed help but didn't know who to trust. My teachers seemed oblivious. My friends wouldn't understand. Then I remembered Uncle Henry. He was Dad's best friend since high school, the kind of guy who showed up to help without being asked. They'd been inseparable until Dad's arrest. Mom had banned him from contacting us after that, saying he was a bad influence, that he enabled Dad's violent tendencies. But I knew that was a lie. Uncle Henry was a good man who smelled like sawdust, and always had butterscotch candies in his pocket. He worked construction, and had 3 kids of his own, twin boys and a little girl who called me her big cousin. I found his number in an old address book Mom had forgotten about in the kitchen junk drawer, buried under expired coupons and dead batteries. I called him from the payphone outside school during PE class, the metal cold against my ear. I told the teacher I felt sick and needed air, clutching my stomach for effect. Uncle Henry answered on the 3rd ring, his gruff voice softening when I said who I was. I talked fast, words tumbling over each other, telling him I needed help, that Dad was innocent, that I had proof. He told me to slow down, to breathe. Then he said to meet him at the public library after school the next day. He'd tell my mom he saw me walking and offered a ride if she asked. His voice was steady, reassuring, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe things would be okay. Brandon was suspicious when I said I was staying late for a group project. He grilled me about who was in my group, what the project was about, which teacher assigned it. But my history teacher backed me up when he called to check, probably annoyed at being bothered during her planning period. I practically ran to the library, my backpack bouncing against my spine. Uncle Henry was waiting in the parking lot in his old pickup truck. The red paint faded but clean. He looked older than I remembered, with more gray in his beard and deeper lines around his eyes. I showed him photos of the journal entries on my phone, swiping through them quickly. His face got darker with each one, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He said he always knew something was off about Dad's arrest. The story never made sense. Too many holes, too convenient. He asked if I still had the actual journal. I told him where I hid it, and he nodded approvingly. He said we needed more than just Dad's suspicions. We needed real evidence, witnesses, something concrete. He knew some people who worked at the bar that night. Maybe they saw something, remembered something the police didn't bother to ask about. Over the next 2 weeks, I met Uncle Henry at the library 3 more times. Each meeting felt like a spy movie, checking over my shoulder, taking different routes. He'd tracked down Edward, who was working security that night. Edward was a big guy with kind eyes who remembered everything. He remembered Brandon being there, which was weird because Brandon had told police he was home all evening watching TV. Edward said he saw Brandon go into the bathroom right before Dad, maybe 30 seconds. But Edward had been too scared to speak up after Dad got arrested so fast, afraid of getting involved, afraid of Brandon who had connections everywhere. Uncle Henry also found Carolyn, who was bartending that night. She had curly red hair and a sharp memory for faces. She said Brandon had been coming around for weeks before the incident, always asking about Dad's schedule, pretending to be friendly. She thought it was strange but didn't think much of it at the time. People asked about regulars all the time. She remembered Brandon ordering a drink that night, a whiskey neat, then disappearing for a while before the body was found. She'd been the one to call 911, her hands shaking so bad she could barely dial. The breakthrough came when Uncle Henry talked to Brian, who managed the bar. Brian was an older guy who'd run the place for 20 years. Brian mentioned they'd upgraded their security system a month before the incident. The police had only taken the main camera footage, but there was a backup system that recorded the hallway to the bathrooms. Brian still had those files on an old hard drive in his office. He'd forgotten about them until Uncle Henry asked, the drive gathering dust behind old liquor invoices. We met at Brian's house to watch the footage. His living room smelled like cigarettes and coffee. My stomach was in knots as Brian connected the drive to his laptop. The timestamp showed Brandon entering the bathroom at 9:47 p.m., walking casually like he had all the time in the world. Dad entered at 9:52 p.m., probably just needing to use the bathroom after his shift. Brandon came out at 9:51 p.m., checking his watch and smoothing down his shirt. Dad came out at 9:53 p.m. covered in blood, shouting for help, his face a mask of shock and horror. It was clear as day. Brandon had 4 minutes alone in that bathroom, more than enough time to cull someone and set up a frame job. Uncle Henry copied the footage onto multiple USB drives, his hands steady and methodical. He said we needed to be careful about how we handled this. We couldn't just go to the police. Brandon might have connections there, friends who owed him favors. We needed to build an airtight case first. He told me to act normal at home, not to let on that we knew anything. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. But Brandon must have sensed something. Maybe I was a bad actress. Maybe he was just paranoid. He started getting more aggressive. One night he came into my room and sat on my bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. The hallway camera couldn't see him from that angle. He said he knew I'd been sneaking around with Uncle Henry. Someone had seen us at the library, probably one of his buddies who seemed to be everywhere. He said if I didn't stop whatever I was doing, Mom might get hurt. He said accidents happen all the time. His voice casual like he was discussing the weather. People fall downstairs, cars have brake problems, gas leaks happen. I understood the threat, felt it settle in my chest like a cold stone. I was terrified but tried to stay calm, keeping my breathing even. I told Uncle Henry at our next meeting, whispering even though we were alone. He said we needed to move faster. He'd been in touch with Dad's lawyer, showing him what we'd found. The lawyer was excited but cautious. He said we needed the original journal too. It would strengthen the case, prove the photos weren't doctored. I told him I'd get it, even though the thought made me want to throw up. That night I waited until 3 a.m., watching the clock's red numbers change with agonizing slowness. I crept to the bathroom, my bare feet silent on the carpet. I carefully retrieved the journal from the toilet tank, the plastic still protecting it. It was still dry in its plastic wrapping. Dad's words safe. I put it in my backpack for school, zipping it into the inner pocket. But when I came out of the bathroom, Brandon was standing in the hallway like a ghost. He asked what I was doing up, his eyes glinting in the darkness. I said I felt sick, holding my stomach. He stared at me for a long moment, then let me pass. I felt his eyes on my back all the way to my room. The next morning, my backpack was gone. I found it in the kitchen, empty, its contents spread across the table. Brandon was sitting at the table with the journal in front of him, flipping through pages with theatrical interest. Mom was reading it, her face pale and confused. Brandon had told her I'd been writing fantasy stories about him, that I was disturbed, that I needed help. He'd started pointing out specific entries, saying, "Look how she's trying to copy your husband's handwriting. See how she mentions you and me together? This is clearly her sick fantasy about breaking us up." Mom's confusion turned to anger as Brandon kept talking, weaving his lies with just enough truth to make them believable. Mom believed him. She said she was disappointed in me, that making up lies about Brandon was sick, that she thought I was dealing with Dad's absence better than this. I tried to tell her it was Dad's journal, but she wouldn't listen. She said I was obviously forging Dad's handwriting to frame Brandon, because I couldn't accept him as my new father. She said I needed therapy, maybe even a special boarding school for troubled teens. Brandon suggested his cousin ran one in another state. Very strict, very isolated. Good for fixing problem children who told lies and caused trouble. The way he said it made my blood run cold. I felt the walls closing in, the room spinning slightly. That day at school, I found Uncle Henry's truck in the parking lot at lunch. I climbed in and broke down crying as I told him what happened. He said not to worry, we still had the footage. But when I got home that afternoon, my phone was missing from my backpack. Brandon had it. He went through everything and found my cloud account, guessing the password after 3 tries. He made me watch as he deleted all the journal photos, his finger stabbing at the screen with vicious satisfaction. He said Uncle Henry's copies wouldn't matter without the original to verify them against. He said the photos could be faked, that any decent lawyer would argue they were doctored without the original journal to compare the handwriting. The bar footage was different. That was from an official security system with timestamps that could be verified. But handwriting in photos? Too easy to forge. That night, Mom told me I was leaving for boarding school on Monday. This special place would help me deal with my delusions about Brandon. She'd already called the school. They were expecting me. It was 1,000 miles away in the mountains. No phones allowed. No outside contact for the first 6 months to avoid negative influences. I realized this was Brandon's plan to shut me up for good, to make me disappear without actually calling me. I managed to slip out Saturday morning when Mom went grocery shopping and Brandon was in the shower. I could hear the water running as I eased open the front door. I ran to Ashley's house and used her phone to call Uncle Henry. Ashley's mom was at work and Ashley covered for me, bless her. I told him about the boarding school. He said to pack a bag and meet him at the library in an hour. But when I got back home, Brandon was waiting on the front steps, his hair still damp. He'd noticed I was gone. He dragged me inside by my hair, my scalp burning. Mom wasn't back yet. He threw me against the wall hard enough to knock a picture frame down and said I'd ruined everything. He said he'd worked too hard to let a bratty kid destroy his plans. He said Dad deserved to rot in prison, that he'd been planning this for months before that night at the bar. He said Mom was easy to manipulate, so desperate for attention after Dad started working 2 jobs to pay off the mortgage. I asked him why he called that man in the bathroom, needing to hear him say it. Brandon laughed, an ugly sound. He said the guy was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Brandon had gone in there to plant a bloody knife he'd prepared, one that would have Dad's prints on it from the kitchen at home. But the hammered guy saw him placing it near the sink and started asking questions, getting too close. So Brandon had to silence him, quick and messy, using that same knife. Then when Dad came in minutes later to help, it was perfect. The blood was fresh, Dad's prints got on everything when he tried to help the victim, tried to stop the bleeding, and in the chaos, Brandon pocketed the actual murder weapon and left a different knife at the scene, one he'd also prepared but that wouldn't trace back to him. I was recording everything on Ashley's phone that I'd hidden in my pocket, the record button pressed before I even walked in. Brandon didn't notice. He was too busy ranting about how smart he'd been, how he'd worn gloves, how he'd studied the bar's schedule for weeks. He said after Dad was gone, marrying Mom was just smart business. She had good life insurance from her job at the hospital, and I'd be worth even more in Social Security if something happened to her. Maybe a car accident, maybe a fall, maybe she'd just get sad and take too many pills. That's when Mom walked in. She'd come back early because she forgot her wallet. She heard everything Brandon had just said. Her face went white as paper. She dropped the groceries, oranges rolling across the floor. Brandon spun around, realizing his mistake. He tried to backtrack, saying I'd made him angry, that he didn't mean it, that he was just trying to scare me straight. But Mom had heard enough. The veil had finally lifted. Brandon stepped toward her and she backed away, her hand reaching behind her. She told him to get out. He said she was overreacting. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the block and told him to leave or she'd call the police. Brandon laughed and said she wouldn't dare. Too much scandal, too much shame. What would the neighbors think? But Mom's hand was steady as she held the knife. For the first time in months, I saw the mom I used to know, the one who protected me from nightmares and kissed scraped knees. Brandon realized she was serious. His face changed, the mask finally dropping completely. He grabbed his keys and wallet from the counter, but before leaving, he turned to Mom and said this wasn't over. He said he knew too much about her, about the affairs she'd had before Dad when they were first married, about the money she'd stolen from Dad's savings to cover her shopping debts. He said if she went to the police, he'd destroy her reputation. Then he left, slamming the door so hard the windows shook and the remaining pictures fell off the walls. Mom collapsed on the floor crying, her body shaking with sobs. I sat next to her and showed her the recording on Ashley's phone. She listened to Brandon's confession again, her face crumbling more with each word. She kept saying she was sorry, that she'd been so stupid, that she'd failed me and Dad both. I told her we needed to call the police now, but she was scared of Brandon's threats, scared of losing everything. I called Uncle Henry instead. He came over within minutes with the bar footage on a USB drive. We sat Mom down at the kitchen table and showed her everything. The journal entries I'd saved screenshots of, the security footage showing Brandon's movements, the witness statements he'd collected and had notarized. Mom threw up when she realized she'd been sleeping next to Dad's killer for months, that she'd been planning a wedding with him. She finally agreed to call the police. 2 detectives came to take our statements. They were professional but kind, offering Mom tissues and speaking gently to me. They listened to the recording of Brandon's confession multiple times. They watched the bar footage on our laptop. They took the journal as evidence, handling it carefully with gloved hands. One detective said they'd been having doubts about Dad's case anyway. The forensics had never quite added up, but the pressure to close the case had been intense. Brandon's confession filled in all the gaps. They put out an arrest warrant for Brandon that night, but he'd disappeared. His apartment was empty, cleaned out in a hurry. His car was gone. The police said not to worry, they'd find him. They put a patrol car outside our house just in case. Mom and I didn't sleep that night. We pushed the couch against the front door and sat in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every sound. The next morning, Uncle Henry called. He'd heard from his construction buddies that Brandon had been spotted at a motel 2 towns over, trying to pay cash for a room. The police were on their way. By noon, they had him in custody. He'd tried to run but didn't get far. They found evidence in his car linking him to the original murder weapon. He'd kept the actual knife all these years like some sick trophy, hidden in a lockbox in his trunk. The knife from the crime scene had been a decoy, but the real one still had traces of the victim's blood in the handle's crevices. Brandon tried to deny everything at first. He said I'd faked the recording using AI, that Mom was lying to protect me because she felt guilty about Dad, but the evidence was overwhelming. The bar footage showed him entering that bathroom. His fingerprints were on the real murder weapon once they tested it properly. The forensics that hadn't matched Dad suddenly made perfect sense when applied to Brandon. Even the angle of the wounds matched Brandon's height, not Dad's. Faced with everything, Brandon finally broke. He confessed fully in exchange for a plea deal. He admitted to planning the whole thing, to framing Dad, to manipulating Mom. He even admitted to things we didn't know about. Other crimes in other states, other victims who'd been blamed for things they didn't do. The detective said Brandon was a serial predator who'd been getting away with it for years, moving from place to place, always finding vulnerable women with kids. Dad's lawyer filed for an emergency appeal based on the new evidence. The judge reviewed everything and ordered Dad's immediate release. After 8 months in prison for a crime he didn't commit, Dad was coming home. Mom and I drove to pick him up. The ride was silent except for the radio playing softly. Mom kept crying, dabbing at her eyes with tissues. I didn't know what to say, my throat tight with emotion. When the prison gates opened and Dad walked out, he looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner, older, his hair more gray than brown now, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. I ran to him and hugged him tighter than I'd ever hugged anyone. He smelled different, like industrial soap and sadness, but he was still my dad. He held me and cried into my hair, whispering that he'd missed me so much, that he'd never stopped believing I'd know the truth. Mom stood back, unsure, wringing her hands. Dad looked at her for a long moment. Then he said they'd talk later, that right now he just wanted to go home. The drive back was quiet except for Dad asking small questions. How was school? Had I grown taller? Was my favorite restaurant still open? Normal Dad questions that felt anything but normal after everything we'd been through. We got home and Dad just stood in the doorway for a minute, looking around like he was memorizing everything. The house looked different without Brandon's stuff everywhere. Mom had thrown out anything he'd touched, leaving weird empty spaces on shelves and walls. Dad walked through each room slowly, running his fingers over furniture, picking up picture frames that Mom hadn't gotten around to replacing yet. That first night was awkward as hell. Dad slept on the couch even though Mom offered him their old bedroom. I heard him moving around at 3 a.m., probably couldn't sleep after months in a cell. I found him in the kitchen making coffee with shaking hands. We sat at the table in silence until he finally asked if I was okay, really okay. I told him about Brandon, about everything. He listened without interrupting, his jaw getting tighter with each detail. When I finished, he said he was sorry he couldn't protect me. I told him it wasn't his fault. The next few days were a blur of lawyers and paperwork. Dad's lawyer was working on getting his record completely cleared, not just overturned. There was talk of compensation for wrongful imprisonment, but Dad said he didn't care about money. He just wanted his life back. Mom kept trying to talk to him, following him around the house, but he wasn't ready. He'd answer her questions with one word and find excuses to leave the room. Brandon's trial date was set for 6 months out. The prosecutor said with his confession and all our evidence, he'd probably get life without parole. They'd linked him to 3 other murders in different states, all with similar patterns. He'd frame someone close to the victim, then swoop in to comfort the grieving family. The detective said we were lucky, that his other victims hadn't survived to expose him. I went back to school, but everything felt different. Kids whispered when I walked by. Everyone knew about Brandon and Dad by now. Ashley stuck by me though, and a few other friends who actually mattered. My teachers were extra nice, which almost made it worse. I didn't want pity, I just wanted normal. But normal was gone. probably forever. Dad started working construction with Uncle Henry. Manual labor, he said, helped clear his head. He'd come home exhausted and covered in dust, but he seemed calmer. He was seeing a therapist too, some guy who specialized in wrongful conviction trauma. Dad didn't talk about the sessions, but I could see they were helping. He stopped flinching when doors slammed, stopped checking locks obsessively. Mom moved out after 2 weeks. She rented a small apartment across town, said she needed space to figure things out. I was relieved, honestly. The tension when her and Dad were in the same room was suffocating. She'd betrayed him in the worst way possible, even if Brandon had manipulated her. Some things you can't come back from. She asked if I wanted to stay with her sometimes, but I said no. I needed to be with Dad. The divorce papers came a month later. Dad signed them without reading them, just wanted it over. Mom gave him everything. The house, the car, full custody of me. Her guilt was eating her alive. She started seeing a therapist too, trying to understand how she'd been so blind. I felt bad for her sometimes, but then I'd remember how she chose Brandon over Dad, how she didn't believe me, and the sympathy would dry up. Uncle Henry became a regular at our house. He'd bring his kids over on weekends and we'd have cookouts like the old days. His twins, Elijah and John, were only 8, but they idolized Dad. They didn't care about his past, just that he could throw a football and tell funny stories. His daughter Deborah was my age and we got close fast. She understood what it was like to have your family turned upside down. Her mom had left when she was 10. 3 months after Dad got out, I had to testify at a pretrial hearing. The prosecutor said my testimony would help ensure Brandon couldn't claim insanity or coercion. I wore my nicest dress, the blue one Dad bought me for my birthday 2 years ago. My hands shook as I swore to tell the truth. Brandon sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller than I remembered. He tried to catch my eye, but I stared straight ahead. I told them everything. About the threats, the touching, the night at the hotel. The judge had to call a recess when I talked about finding Dad's journal because I started crying too hard to continue. Dad wasn't allowed in the courtroom since he might be called as a witness later, but Uncle Henry was there. He gave me a thumbs up from the gallery, reminding me I was brave, that I could do this. Brandon's lawyer tried to make me look like a confused kid, asking if maybe I'd misunderstood Brandon's intentions. I stayed calm and repeated what happened, exactly as it happened. The prosecutor showed the recording from Ashley's phone, and Brandon's face went gray. His lawyer asked for a plea deal that afternoon, 25 to life instead of life without parole. The prosecutor said no way. After the hearing, reporters tried to talk to us outside the courthouse. Dad shielded me with his body as we pushed through them to Uncle Henry's truck. They shouted questions about forgiveness, about moving forward, about how it felt to see Brandon in chains. We didn't answer. There was nothing to say that would make them understand. This wasn't entertainment. It was our life. Mom started sending me letters, long rambling apologies about how she failed as a mother, how she should have seen the signs. I read the first few, then started throwing them away unopened. Dad said I should consider forgiving her eventually, for my own peace, not hers, but I wasn't ready. Maybe I'd never be ready. She'd chosen a monster over her own family. Some things are unforgivable. Brandon's actual trial was brutal. They brought in his other victims' families, showing pattern after pattern of his behavior. One woman from Arizona testified about how he dated her after her husband died in a suspicious accident. She'd gotten bad vibes and dumped him, probably saved her own life. Another family from Nevada talked about their son who was serving time for a murder that sounded exactly like Dad's case. The prosecutor said they were reopening that case too. Dad testified on day 3. He wore his only suit, the one from their wedding that he'd kept for some reason. He talked about finding the body, about trying to help, about the confusion when they arrested him. He talked about prison, about missing my birthday, about writing letters I'd never get to read. His voice broke when he talked about the day I was born, how he'd promised to always protect me and felt like he'd failed. Brandon took the stand on day 5, against his lawyer's advice. He tried to paint himself as a victim of circumstance, said the man in the bathroom had attacked him first. But under cross-examination, his story fell apart. He contradicted himself, got angry, showed his true face to the jury. When the prosecutor asked about his plans for me and Mom, he refused to answer. His own lawyer looked defeated. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Murder, conspiracy, fraud, attempted assault on a minor. The list went on. The judge sentenced him to life without parole, consecutive sentences for each crime. Brandon didn't react, just stared at the table. As they let him out, he looked at me one last time. I stared back, wanting him to see that he hadn't broken me, that I'd won. Dad and I went to his favorite restaurant after, the little Mexican place that still had his picture on the wall from when he was a regular. The owner hugged him and said the meal was on the house. We ate in comfortable silence, both exhausted but relieved. It was over. Really over. Brandon would die in prison and we could start rebuilding. Mom tried to come to the house the next week. Dad wouldn't let her in, talked to her through the screen door. She wanted to apologize again, wanted to try family counseling. Dad said no, that ship had sailed. She needed to move on, and so did we. She cried and begged, but Dad stood firm. I watched from the stairs, feeling nothing. She'd made her choice and now she had to live with it. I started seeing a therapist too, some lady named Dr. Cheryl who specialized in trauma. She helped me process everything, taught me it wasn't my fault, that I'd been incredibly brave. Some days I believed her, some days I didn't. But slowly, the nightmares stopped. I stopped checking locks obsessively, stopped flinching when men walked behind me. Progress came in small steps. Dad and I developed new routines. Sunday breakfast at the diner, Wednesday movie nights, helping Uncle Henry with projects on Saturdays. We talked more than we ever had before, about everything. School, friends, the future. He helped me with homework even though math wasn't his strong suit. He came to every school event, cheering too loud at my mediocre clarinet performances. We were learning how to be a family again, just the two of us. 6 months after the trial, Dad met someone. Carolyn, the bartender who testified, started coming around. First just as a friend, then something more. She made Dad laugh, real laughs, not the forced ones he'd been doing. I liked her. She didn't try to be my mom, just treated me like a person. She'd bring takeout and we'd watch bad movies, making fun of the plot holes. Dad smiled more when she was around. Mom eventually stopped trying to contact us. I heard from Ashley's mom that she'd moved to another state, starting fresh where nobody knew her story. Part of me hoped she'd find peace. Part of me didn't care. She'd been so easily fooled, so quick to replace Dad. Maybe Brandon had seen that weakness in her from the start. Maybe that's why he'd picked our family to destroy. A year after everything, Dad got a settlement from the state for wrongful imprisonment. Not millions, but enough to pay off the house and put money away for my college. He bought a new truck, took a vacation to the mountains, finally started living again. He kept working construction though, said he liked the honesty of it. You either built something right, or you didn't. No room for lies or manipulation. I turned 15 that spring. Dad threw me a big party, probably overcompensating for the birthdays he'd missed. Uncle Henry's family came. Carolyn was there. Even some kids from school showed up. We had a bounce house, which was ridiculous for teenagers, but nobody complained. Dad grilled burgers and told embarrassing stories about when I was little. For a few hours, we felt like a normal family having a normal party. That night, after everyone left, Dad and I cleaned up the yard in comfortable silence. He thanked me for believing in him, for never giving up. I told him I always knew he was innocent, that he wasn't capable of hurting anyone. He hugged me tight and said I'd saved his life. We both cried a little, but it was the good kind of tears. The healing kind. Life went on. I made honor roll, started dating a nice guy named Rory from my chemistry class. Dad threatened to clean his shotgun when Rory came over, but he was joking, mostly. Carolyn moved in after a year, bringing her cat Mr. Whiskers, who immediately claimed Dad's chair. We became a weird little family, built on shared trauma but held together by choice and love. Brandon died in prison 2 years later. Heart attack, the letter said. He was 43. I felt nothing when I read it, just closed the letter and went back to my homework. Dad asked if I was okay, and I said yeah, I really was. Brandon had been dead to me since the day they sentenced him. His actual death was just paperwork, nothing more. Mom sent a card for my 18th birthday. Just signed it, Love Mom, with no return address. I kept it for some reason, tucked in my desk drawer with other things I couldn't quite throw away. Dad said maybe someday I'd want to find her, make peace. Maybe he was right. Or maybe some bridges were meant to stay burned. Time would tell. I got into college on a full scholarship, planning to study criminal justice. Maybe become a lawyer, help other families torn apart by lies. Dad cried at graduation, embarrassing me in front of everyone. Carolyn took a million pictures while Uncle Henry's family cheered from the bleachers. My chosen family, the one that stood by me when everything fell apart. The night before I left for college, Dad and I sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies. He told me he was proud of me, that I'd become an amazing young woman despite everything. I told him I loved him, that he was the best dad anyone could ask for. We sat in comfortable silence. No need for more words. We'd survived the worst thing imaginable and came out stronger. That was enough. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found Dad's journal that night. If Brandon had succeeded in sending me away, if Mom had married him, if Dad had died in prison believing nobody cared. But I did find it. I did fight back. And sometimes that's all you can do. Fight for the truth and hope someone listens. In our case, they finally did. My 14-year-old son beat his dad's new wife unconscious at their wedding, and I'm so proud of him. The call came through my commanding officer. Your son committed felony assault at his father's wedding. You need to get home now. I was on a base in Germany and hadn't seen my boys in 8 months. Now my teenage son, who stopped wrestling because he hated hurting people, was facing charges for brutalizing a woman at the altar. After an 18-hour emergency flight, I headed to my ex-husband's house where my son was. The wife's dark blood was still stained by the driveway. I rang the doorbell. My ex-husband Conrad answered, his face twisted with rage. We're pressing charges. I'm not taking anyone's side until I see both, I said, pushing past him. The living room was a tribunal. Conrad's parents on the couch, his brother Potter by the fireplace, his sister Fen in the corner, the bride's parents standing like guard dogs. And in the center, the bride, Lauren, with a splinted nose, 2 black eyes, bandages across her face. She was crying, dabbing her eyes carefully around the swelling. And there, surrounded by this mob, sat my son, my 14-year-old who refused to kill insects because he could have been born an ant, who taught his little stepbrother origami. He sat perfectly straight, chin raised, looking me dead in the eyes with zero regret. He looked proud of what he did. Your son destroyed our family, Conrad spat. Look what he did to her face. Lauren sobbed harder. He's an animal. They're trying him as an adult, right? Grandpa shook his head in disgust. I looked at my son. His knuckles were still bruised and swollen. There seemed to be no real excuse. But then I asked for his side of the story. He looked around the room slowly, taking in every face. Then he spoke, voice clear. You want to know the truth? She's been molesting me for 6 months. That's why I did it. My world stopped, but the room exploded instantly. Liar! Disgusting! How dare you? Lauren's face shifted for just a second before she wailed louder. He's making it up. I've been nothing but loving. Her mother stepped forward, pointing at my son. You evil little... But her father grabbed her arm, his face pale like he'd been expecting this. In the midst of all the chaos, my son pulled out his phone and swiped to his hidden photos. She said 14-year-old boys always want it. Said I should be grateful. I saw the images over his shoulder and my stomach turned. Conrad's hands were shaking as he stared at the screen. Those could be... anyone could have, but his voice was hollow, like he was reading a script he didn't believe. Lauren tried to snatch the phone. Those are out of context. I was just... She stopped, realizing she'd just admitted they were real. My son stood up, voice shaking with rage. Dad, I told you 3 months ago. You said she's just being affectionate. Conrad started stuttering. I didn't. I thought... Grandpa, you laughed. Said lucky boy, wish I had that problem at 14. Grandpa's face went from red to white. He looked at Lauren, then at his grandson, and something crumbled in his expression. Aunt Fen, you told me, don't be dramatic. Fen was backing toward the door, tears streaming. Oh God, I thought you were just... Uncle Potter, you said I should be grateful. Potter had his head in his hands. Jesus Christ, I was joking. I didn't know she was actually... Grandma, you said boys can't be raped by women. Grandma collapsed into the couch, rosary beads in her hands, whispering prayers. Every single one of you told me to shut up about it. Lauren's parents were having a whispered argument. Her father hissed, not again, Patricia. You said she was better. The word again hung in the air. But that's not why I hit her, my son cut through. Everyone immediately immediately froze. What do you mean that's not why? I asked. Last week I caught her coming out of Tommy's room at 2 a.m. He's 9. My blood went cold. Tommy was my ex-husband's 9-year-old son. Lauren's mask finally slipped completely. That little brat came on to me. Conrad grabbed her by the shoulders. What did you just say? For the first time, real fear flashed across her face. My son was crying now. Ugly, gasping sobs. The morning of your wedding, I begged you. You said not today. I knew nothing I'd say would stop her, so I stopped her the only way I could. My son then wiped his tears and ran upstairs. He came down carrying Tommy, who buried his face in his shoulder. Tommy, did Lauren touch you? The little boy nodded. Then he pulled up his pajama shorts, bruises on his inner thighs. Lauren's mother screamed at her daughter. You promised! You went to therapy! You promised this would never happen again! Lauren stood there, all pretense gone, her bruised face twisted in contempt. That's when my son spoke again. We're children, and every adult in this room chose her over us. I called 911 immediately. Lauren's family was begging me to talk, telling me they'd drop the charges, but I wasn't listening. Well, that's when Lauren ran to the bathroom. I don't know what she did in there, but I didn't care. 10 minutes later, she came out just as police were at the door. They took her away. I took my son Tommy and drove to my best friend's place. But 2 hours later, my phone rang. The detective's voice was serious. We need you at the station immediately. I drove with my stomach in knots. They led me straight to an interrogation room. Turns out, whatever Lauren planted on her phone in the bathroom had gotten me in hot water, and I was about to find out that monsters like her always have a backup plan. The detective walked me down a narrow hallway that smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. He opened a door to a small room with just a metal table and 2 plastic chairs. He slid a manila folder across the table and told me to take a look. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were screenshots from a phone showing text messages between me and Lauren. The messages showed me telling her she could handle my son however she needed to while I was deployed. One message said I trusted her judgment completely about discipline. Another said teenage boys needed firm boundaries, and I was counting on her to provide them. I stared at these messages I had never sent. My brain couldn't process what I was looking at. The timestamps showed these were from 3 months ago, right when my son first told Conrad about what was happening. The detective sat across from me watching my face carefully. He explained they found these during their search of Lauren's phone after her arrest. He asked me directly if I had given Lauren permission to discipline my son physically. Then he asked if I had given her permission to engage in sexual contact with him as a form of teaching or punishment. I told him absolutely not and that I had never sent those messages. I demanded to see my phone records from the carrier to prove it. He said they would need to keep my phone for comparison and forensic analysis. That's when it hit me that I wasn't just there as a witness anymore. They were investigating me as a possible accomplice. They took me to another room where a technician photographed my hands from every angle. Then they rolled each finger in ink and pressed them onto cards. The technician explained they needed to rule me out as an accomplice to the crimes. The word accomplice made my stomach turn over. Lauren was trying to drag me down with her by making it look like I knew and approved of what she was doing. For the next 3 hours, they asked me question after question about my relationship with Lauren. When did we first meet? How often did we communicate? What kind of conversations we had? Whether I knew about her methods with my son. They wanted to know every detail about our interactions. They asked if I had ever discussed discipline strategies with her. They asked if I had noticed any changes in my son's behavior. They asked why I hadn't come home sooner if I suspected something was wrong. Every question felt like a trap. Finally, they let me leave, but they kept my phone and told me not to leave town. I walked out of the station feeling like the walls were closing in. I drove straight to the law office of Casey Maplegrove, who my friend had recommended. Casey took one look at my face and immediately cleared her schedule. She sat me down in her office and had me go through everything from the beginning. I told her about the wedding and what my son revealed and now these fake messages. Casey started typing rapidly on her computer while I talked. She immediately filed preservation orders with all the major phone carriers and social media companies. She explained that Lauren probably used spoofing apps or edited screenshots during those 10 minutes she was in the bathroom. Casey said we needed to get the actual phone records from the carrier to prove the messages were fake. She also filed requests for Lauren's search history to see if she had looked up how to fake text messages. Casey told me not to talk to the police again without her present. She said Lauren was clearly trying to muddy the waters and create reasonable doubt for her own defense. The next morning, Derek Oakridge from CPS showed up at my friend's house where we were staying. He needed to interview both boys separately as part of the official investigation. He was gentle with them, but very thorough in his questions. He had my son go through everything that had happened with Lauren from the beginning. My son told him about the first time she came into his room at night. He described how she would wait until Conrad was asleep. He talked about the threats she made if he told anyone. Derek wrote everything down carefully and had my son sign each page. Then Derek interviewed Tommy separately in another room. The little boy was scared, but he told Derek about the times Lauren came to his room. He showed Derek the bruises that were still healing on his legs. Derek took photographs of every mark and documented their size and color. Something feels really off about Lauren's bathroom trip. 10 minutes is a long time to just sit there while police are coming. Her mom's reaction about not again and therapy makes me wonder how many times this woman has done this before to other kids. He had a nurse practitioner come to do a full physical exam on both boys. After the interviews, Derek sat down with me to explain what would happen next. He was implementing a safety plan that would allow me supervised contact with both boys while the investigations continued. I would have to meet with them at the CPS office with a social worker present. It felt humiliating to need supervision to see my own son, but I agreed immediately because their safety was all that mattered. Derek explained that the criminal case against Lauren would move forward regardless of what happened with the investigation into me. He said the boys' disclosures were credible and consistent with abuse. The physical evidence on Tommy supported their statements, but he also warned me that Lauren's defense attorney would probably try to use those fake messages to claim I was involved, or at least negligent. Over the next few days, everything moved fast, but also painfully slow. Casey got the phone records from my carrier that proved I never sent those messages. The metadata showed they were created on Lauren's phone using a third-party app. Casey also found that Lauren had searched for how to fake text messages for court and spoofing apps that look real on her laptop the week before the wedding. The police detective called Casey to say they were no longer considering me a suspect, but I was still a key witness. My phone rang while I was still in the parking lot, and the screen showed a military number. Chandler Birchgrove from JAG was on the line telling me my security clearance was now under review due to the ongoing investigation. He said my emergency leave was extended, but I was placed on administrative hold, which meant I couldn't return to duty until this mess was cleared up. I sat in my car feeling like my whole career was falling apart while my kids needed me most. Casey called right after and said she'd gotten copies of those fake screenshots Lauren had shown the police. She was looking at them on her her computer and immediately noticed the font was wrong for my phone model. The timestamp formatting didn't match either, and some of the messages had different spacing than others. She'd already called in Corey Cedarglin, who specialized in proving when digital evidence was fake. He was driving over to her office right now to examine everything properly. Meanwhile, Devin Pineshire from Victim Services called to say she'd arranged for Tommy to have a medical exam at the Children's Hospital that afternoon. I drove him there myself, but when we got to the exam room, they told me I had to wait in the hallway. Tommy looked so small walking in there with just the nurse and doctor. I paced that hallway for 3 hours, checking my phone every few minutes and trying not to think about what they might find. The nurse brought him juice boxes twice, and each time I caught a glimpse of him sitting on the exam table in a hospital gown. When they finally finished, Tommy came out holding a stuffed bear they'd given him and wouldn't look me in the eyes. Devin walked out with a thick folder of documentation and told me they'd found evidence consistent with his disclosure. My phone started buzzing with voicemails from Conrad, who was losing his mind about not being able to see Tommy. The safety plan required all visits to be supervised now, and he was screaming into my voicemail about how this was all my fault. First message, he blamed me for turning our son against Lauren. Second message, he blamed Lauren for being a predator. Third message, he blamed our son for ruining his wedding. Fourth message, he was back to blaming me for not warning him about Lauren, even though I'd literally just found out myself. His parents were calling too, but I deleted those without listening. Lauren posted bail that same day using her parents' money, and within hours her lawyer had filed a restraining order against me. The paperwork claimed I'd orchestrated the whole situation to get custody of Tommy, and that I'd coached my son to attack her. She was painting herself as the victim of a jealous ex-wife's scheme. Casey said this was typical predator behavior trying to flip the narrative. The next morning was my son's CPS interview with Derek Oakridge at the Children's Advocacy Center. My son sat in that little room with the cameras and told Derek everything in detail. He gave exact dates when he'd told his dad about the abuse 3 months ago. He remembered the specific words his grandfather used when he laughed it off. He knew what his aunt was wearing the day she told him not to be dramatic. He even remembered what TV show was on when his uncle said he should be grateful. Derek wrote everything down and created an official timeline of every adult who'd been told and failed to act. The safety plan they put in place meant both boys had to stay at my friend's house with me, only allowed there during approved hours. We set up a weird routine where I'd arrive at 7 in the morning to get them ready for school. I'd leave when they got on the bus and come back at 3 when they got home. I had to leave again at 8 every night, which killed me because that's when Tommy had the worst nightmares. My friend would text me updates about him crying for me, but I wasn't allowed to come back until morning. We lived like this for weeks, waiting for court dates and investigations to move forward. Then an email came from Tommy's school counselor that made me sick. She'd pulled his records going back a year and found clear changes starting 6 months ago, right when Lauren moved in. His grades dropped from A's to C's, and he'd gone from never missing school to having 12 absences. His teacher had noted he'd become withdrawn and stopped participating in class. Another teacher wrote that he'd started falling asleep at his desk. The counselor had even called Conrad about it, but he'd said Tommy was just adjusting to having a new stepmom. All these warning signs had been documented and ignored while that monster was hurting him. Casey forwarded me another development when the detective called her about finding a voice memo on Lauren's phone. It was supposedly me threatening to destroy her life if she married Conrad. The detective was sending it over for analysis, but warned it sounded pretty convincing. Casey immediately demanded the original file, not just a copy, so Corey could examine it properly. Corey got to work on the audio file as soon as it arrived at Casey's office. He pulled up the metadata first and found the file had been created just 2 days before the wedding. The wave patterns showed weird inconsistencies where background noise suddenly changed. He isolated different layers of the audio and found evidence of voice splicing where words had been cut from different sources and pasted together. The modulation patterns didn't match natural speech, and there were digital artifacts showing AI voice generation markers. Corey said he could prove in court that this audio was completely fabricated using at least 3 different source recordings and an AI voice tool. Casey immediately filed the evidence with the court and started the process to subpoena Lauren's phone carrier records. She explained that getting the actual call logs and metadata would take at least 3 weeks. Every single day felt like a month while we waited. I couldn't sleep properly knowing Lauren was still out there spreading lies about me. Casey kept reminding me that building a solid case takes time, but I was going crazy watching my life fall apart. 2 days into the wait, Casey forwarded me an email marked confidential from Lauren's father. He admitted that Lauren had an incident with a neighbor's child 5 years ago. The family had moved states afterward, and he wanted immunity before giving us more details. Casey said we'd need the prosecutor's approval for any immunity deal, which could take weeks. The restraining order hearing came up first, and I thought we'd finally get some protection. Casey argued that I'd never threatened Lauren and was only defending my son from abuse. The judge barely looked at our evidence before issuing mutual no-contact orders. He said given the serious allegations on both sides, he was being cautious. I wanted to scream that being cautious meant protecting children, not their abuser. Meanwhile, Tommy had his medical exam at the Children's Hospital. The doctor found evidence consistent with abuse, but used such careful medical language it made me sick. Terms like findings suggestive of trauma and injuries consistent with reported mechanism, instead of just saying what we all knew. The report would help our case, but it felt like nobody wanted to say the actual words. Then Casey got a call from a police officer who'd been reviewing body camera footage from the wedding. He'd found audio of Lauren talking to her mother after my son hit her. In the recording, you could hear Lauren saying, "Those photos shouldn't matter," before her mother shushed her. Casey immediately requested a copy and filed it as evidence in both cases. She explained her strategy was to defend me from the false accusations while keeping my son's assault case completely separate. 2 different legal tracks meant double the work and double the cost. She warned me this would be expensive and exhausting, but we had no choice. I'd already spent $8,000 and we were just getting started. That same week, I got formal notice from my military command. My security clearance was suspended pending the investigation outcome. Even if I was completely cleared, this would end any chance of promotion. 15 years of perfect service destroyed by one lying predator. My commanding officer called personally to say he believed me, but his hands were tied. Protocol required suspension for any accusation involving minors regardless of evidence. I'd gone from training soldiers in Germany to sitting in my friend's living room unemployed. Corey had finished his full analysis of the fake voice memo by then. Lauren's father suddenly having information about an old incident with a neighbor's child but wanting immunity first. That timing feels awfully convenient. Why didn't this come up when his daughter first got arrested instead of waiting until now to mention it? He found proof it was created using at least 3 different recordings spliced together. The digital artifacts showed clear evidence of AI voice generation software. The creator creation timestamp in the file's metadata was 2 days after Lauren claimed I'd left the message. He wrote up a detailed technical report that Casey said would demolish their evidence in court. But courts move slowly, and every day that passed was another day my kids suffered. CPS started their evaluation process for Tommy's placement since Conrad's parents had minimized the abuse. The caseworker interviewed family members to see if any relatives could provide a safe home. She mentioned they might need to consider therapeutic foster care if no family placement was appropriate. The thought of Tommy going to strangers made me physically sick. Conrad's sister called saying she'd take Tommy, but only if I admitted I was lying. His brother said the same thing. They all wanted me to confess to making everything up before they'd help. The CPS worker said their conditional offers showed they weren't suitable placements. She started looking at Conrad's extended family, but most lived out of state. 3 weeks into this nightmare, Conrad showed up at my friend's house demanding Tommy. My friend Sarah saw him pull up and immediately called the police while locking the doors. I grabbed my phone and started recording video from inside the living room window. Conrad was pounding on the door, screaming that Tommy was his son. He said the safety plan was illegal and he had parental rights. Tommy was hiding in the bedroom closet crying, and my son was trying to comfort him. The police arrived within 10 minutes, but Conrad had already kicked the front door hard enough to crack the frame. They made him leave, but said without a restraining order, they couldn't arrest him. Sarah had to pay for a new door and install security cameras that same day. Casey filed emergency paperwork for a protective order, but the judge wouldn't hear it for another week. Every night, we'd hear cars slow down outside and wonder if it was Conrad coming back. Tommy started wetting the bed and having nightmares about Lauren coming to get him. My son stopped eating properly and lost 12 pounds in 3 weeks. The stress was destroying both kids while the legal system moved at a snail's pace. Casey kept saying we were building a strong case, but I could see my children falling apart. The phone records finally came back showing Lauren had never received any calls from my number, but her lawyer argued that didn't prove anything since I could have used a different phone. The prosecutor called a meeting 2 days later at the courthouse where he laid out my son's options while Casey sat next to us taking notes. He pushed papers across the table showing the assault charges could mean juvenile detention, but mentioned something called a diversion program. Casey leaned forward and started talking about counseling alternatives while my son sat there silent and pale. The prosecutor kept checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. Casey pushed for therapy instead of any formal charges, and after 40 minutes of back and forth, they agreed to consider it if my son completed a written statement about everything. That night, my son sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours writing page after page about what Lauren did to him. His hand cramped up twice and he had to stop to shake it out. I made him hot chocolate, but he didn't touch it. When he finally finished, he had 12 pages front and back describing every single thing she'd done. He wrote about how she'd come into his room at night and touch him while he pretended to sleep. He wrote about the photos she made him take and how she said nobody would believe him. He wrote about catching her with Tommy and how he knew the wedding was his only chance to stop her. Reading it made me throw up twice in the bathroom while he slept on the couch. The next morning, we drove Tommy to the Children's Advocacy Center for his interview. The building looked like a regular house from outside with toys in the waiting room and bright paintings on the walls. They took Tommy back to a special room with cameras while I sat in the lobby watching other parents stare at their phones. The interviewer was trained to talk to kids about abuse without making it worse for them. I could hear Tommy crying through the door even though they said it was soundproof. After 2 hours, they brought him out and he wouldn't look at me. The interviewer pulled Casey aside and showed her the preliminary report on her tablet. The grooming pattern started 6 months ago with small boundary violations that got worse each week. Lauren had told Tommy it was their special secret and that bad things would happen if he told. The report documented bruising and multiple stages of healing and behavioral changes his teachers had noticed. Casey said this report alone would strengthen the criminal case significantly. That afternoon, the detective called me into his office and warned me about talking to Conrad's family. He said any coordination between witnesses could look like tampering even if we were just checking on each other. Casey told me all communication had to go through her office from now on to avoid any appearance of interference. She gave me a special email account to use only for case-related messages that she could monitor. 2 days later, Casey got a judge to sign an order for complete forensic imaging of Lauren's phone. The tech team would recover deleted files and hidden apps to find the real source of those fake messages. Lauren's lawyer fought it for a week, saying it violated her privacy, but the judge sided with us. The phone company finally sent over the complete records showing every call and text from my phone for the past year. Casey spread them out on her conference table and highlighted the relevant dates with a yellow marker. There were 0 messages to Lauren's number during any of the times she claimed I'd threatened her. Casey called it our first solid piece of evidence that she was lying about the threats. She filed it with the court that same afternoon while I sat in her office eating stale crackers from the vending machine. Corey called Casey's office the next morning with big news about Lauren's phone. He'd found a spoofing app hidden in a calculator folder that was installed at 11:47 p.m. the night of the wedding. That matched exactly when Lauren locked herself in the bathroom after we called the police. The app could fake messages from any phone number and make them look real in screenshots. Corey sent over the technical report showing the installation timestamp and app history. Casey immediately forwarded everything to the prosecutor, who called back within an hour. He said he was becoming less interested in pursuing any charges against me given the mounting evidence, but he wouldn't formally close the investigation yet because that's how prosecutors protect themselves from lawsuits. Casey said this was typical hedging, and not to worry about it, but I couldn't sleep anyway. 3 days later, my phone started blowing up with notifications from numbers I didn't recognize. Someone had leaked details about the case online and posted my name and photo on social media. The messages started nice enough with people saying they supported me, but quickly turned dark. Death threats filled my voicemail within hours. People found my work email and sent graphic descriptions of what they wanted to do to me. Someone posted my friend's address where we were staying and said they were coming to burn it down. Casey helped me screenshot everything and file police reports while we installed security cameras at my friend's house. The harassment got so bad I had to change my phone number twice in 1 week. My friend's kids were scared to go to the school because cars kept driving slowly past the house taking pictures. Casey hired a private security company to patrol the neighborhood and escort us to court appearances. The online mob had decided I was guilty without knowing any facts about the case. 3 days later, a letter showed up from Fen with shaky handwriting saying she was sorry for not believing my son. Potter sent a text saying he wasn't picking sides but needed space from the whole situation. Conrad's parents completely stopped answering calls or messages like we didn't exist anymore. The family was splitting apart with everyone choosing their own way to handle the guilt. CPS came to my friend's house that week with paperwork about Tommy's placement. They said he needed to stay in therapeutic foster care and my friend's family qualified since they had the right training. Tommy would get to stay where he felt safe while getting help for what happened to him. The social worker brought toys and books to help him feel more at home. My friend's kids were being really gentle with him and teaching him card games. 2 weeks passed before Lauren's lawyer filed papers trying to get my son's photos thrown out as evidence. She claimed they were illegally obtained and couldn't be used in court. The motion meant my son might have to testify about how he got the photos. Casey immediately started preparing counter-arguments about why the evidence should stay. The hearing got scheduled for the following month with everyone required to appear. Meanwhile, my son had to go to juvenile court for the assault charges. The judge looked at all the evidence and offered him a diversion program instead of regular prosecution. He'd have to do therapy twice a week and 60 hours of community service at the animal shelter. If he completed everything successfully, his record would stay clean. My son nodded and signed the papers without saying anything. The military called me that same week about an administrative board hearing. They said the negative publicity from the case was affecting unit morale and base security. My security clearance was under review and they were questioning my humanitarian leave status. Why did Lauren wait until she was locked in the bathroom to install that spoofing app? That timing seems way too convenient, like she already had a backup plan ready to go just in case things went bad at the wedding. I had to submit pages of documentation explaining everything that happened. The hearing got scheduled for 3 weeks out with my career hanging in the balance. During the suppression hearing, the judge kept asking Lauren's lawyer to explain technical problems with her phone evidence against me. Corey had found timestamps that didn't match and metadata showing files were created after she went to the bathroom. The lawyer kept stumbling over his words, trying to explain the inconsistencies. The judge frowned and took notes while Lauren sat there looking nervous. Her bruises had faded, but she kept touching her face like they still hurt. After 3 hours of testimony, the judge said he'd rule within 2 weeks. CPS finished their investigation and officially found that Lauren had abused both boys. They also found Conrad guilty of failure to protect his children from a known threat. He got mandated to take parenting classes every week for 6 months. The safety plan got extended another 6 months with surprise home visits included. Conrad started showing up to the required classes without complaining. He sat in the back taking notes and asking questions about warning signs he'd missed. His anger was shifting away from us and toward Lauren as more evidence came out. He started sending short emails asking how Tommy was doing. One morning, I woke up to dozens of Facebook messages from accounts I didn't recognize. They were all saying horrible things about me and my son, but using details only Lauren would know. Casey documented every single message and tracked the IP addresses back to Lauren's apartment building. We filed contempt charges since she was violating the no-contact order through her friends. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing about possibly revoking her bail. Lauren showed up with a different lawyer who argued she couldn't control what her friends did, but Casey had proof she'd been logged into the fake accounts herself. My son started trauma therapy but wouldn't talk for the first 3 sessions. He just sat there drawing pictures of birds and trees while the therapist waited patiently. On the 4th session, he finally said one sentence about feeling dirty all the time. The therapist gave him special soap to use when the feelings got too strong. Week by week, he started saying a few more words about what happened. Sometimes he'd stop mid-sentence and go back to drawing birds. The therapist said this was normal and healing would take time. Tommy was doing better in his therapy using play dolls to show what happened. His therapist was documenting everything for the criminal case. My friend's family was being amazing with him, and he'd started smiling again sometimes. The military board reviewed all my documents and testimony from Casey about the false allegations. They decided to extend my humanitarian leave but put me on administrative duty when I returned. My security clearance stayed intact but would be reviewed again in 6 months. Conrad's parents finally sent one email saying they needed time to process everything. They admitted they should have listened when my son first spoke up. Potter started texting again asking if the boys needed anything. Fen sent gift cards for clothes and toys but still couldn't face us in person. The family was slowly trying to figure out how to move forward with all this guilt. The school called me 3 days later about setting up my son's return. We sat in a conference room with the principal, 2 counselors, and the special education coordinator. They kept using words like trauma-informed approach and modified schedule while I filled out stacks of paperwork. My son would start with half days and work up to full time over 6 weeks. A counselor would check on him every morning and afternoon. He'd get extra time for tests and could leave class if he felt overwhelmed. The principal assured me they'd keep everything confidential, but I knew how schools worked. By the time we left, I could already see teachers whispering in the hallway. That same afternoon, I checked my email and saw the promotion list had posted. I scrolled through 15 years worth of peers getting their names on there. Mine wasn't anywhere. My commanding officer had warned me this would happen, but seeing it made my chest tight. All those deployments, all those perfect evaluations, gone because of one incident that wasn't even my fault. I closed my laptop and tried not to think about the retirement points I'd never earn now. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from Lauren's family's lawyer. They wanted us to sign NDAs or face a defamation lawsuit for $2 million. The letter claimed we'd damaged Lauren's reputation with false accusations. I immediately called Casey, the lawyer my friend had mentioned might help us. She laughed when I read her the letter. They're scared. This is desperation. Casey met me at a coffee shop that afternoon with a stack of her own papers. She'd already pulled Lauren's arrest record and the CPS reports. We're not signing anything that silences these boys, she said. I watched her highlight sections of their proposed agreement. Look at this clause. They want the boys to never speak about the abuse, even in therapy. She crossed out entire pages with a red pen. Over the next week, Casey went back and forth with their lawyers. They offered us $50,000 to drop everything, then $100,000, then $200. Each time Casey told them the same thing. My clients want justice, not money. Their lawyer got nasty, threatening to bury us in legal fees. Casey didn't even blink. Try it. I work on contingency for abuse cases. She slid a counter-proposal across the table. Criminal prosecution goes forward. No NDAs, no money changes hands. The lawyer's face went red, but he took the papers. Meanwhile, the prosecutor called with news about Lauren's case. She's been offered 18 months if she pleads to misdemeanor assault. I felt my stomach drop. Misdemeanor? She molested 2 children. The prosecutor sounded tired. Her attorney is good. They're claiming the evidence is circumstantial. He explained how Lauren's lawyer was filing motion after motion to get evidence thrown out. They wanted my son's photos excluded as illegally obtained. They claimed Tommy's testimony was coached. Every delay tactic in the book. We're looking at trial in 8 months minimum, he said. The court's backed up. 8 months of waiting, of legal bills piling up, of my son having to relive this over and over. That night around 11, my phone rang. Tommy's small voice came through. I can't sleep. She's in my dreams. I could hear him crying. I walked him through the breathing exercises his therapist taught him. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. We did it together for 10 minutes until his breathing steadied. Conrad got on the phone briefly. This happens every night now. He won't sleep in his own bed. I called Tommy's therapist therapist first thing in the morning for an emergency session. She fit him in that afternoon. 3 weeks passed before my son's juvenile court date arrived. The judge reviewed his therapy attendance records and the reports from his counselor. My son had shown up to every single session. The judge approved his diversion program with conditions: 100 hours of community service at the animal shelter, weekly therapy for a year, monthly check-ins with a probation officer, no contact with Lauren or her family. My son nodded at each requirement. The judge reminded him this was his chance to avoid a permanent record. We started the community service that weekend. Watching my son clean kennels and walk dogs, you'd never know what he'd been through. The animals loved him immediately. Casey called the next morning with good news. I filed a motion to get Lauren's previous therapy records. Lauren's family fought it hard, claiming privacy rights, but Casey had found a precedent about pattern behavior and abuse cases. The judge sided with us. The records from her previous therapist in Michigan are being sent over. Casey's voice had an edge of excitement. There might be other victims. We'd know within 2 weeks what those records contained. That same day, I got called into my commander's office. The formal reprimand was waiting on his desk. Conduct unbecoming for the negative attention brought to the unit. It was the lightest punishment possible, but it still felt like a punch. My commander looked uncomfortable as I signed it. I fought for you. This was the best I could do. The reprimand would stay in my file forever. Any board that reviewed my record would see it. My military career had effectively ended, even if I could stay in. I walked out of his office knowing I'd never make rank again. The next few days blurred together with lawyer meetings, therapy appointments, and school conferences. Every step forward felt like 2 steps back, but we kept going because what else could we do? The boys needed normal as much as we could give them, even if normal now meant counselors and courtrooms and nightmares that wouldn't stop. Conrad started therapy 3 weeks later as part of his custody agreement with CPS. I got the report copy from my lawyer showing what he told his therapist. He sat in that office admitting he'd noticed Lauren getting too close to the boys months before the wedding. He'd seen her touching my son's shoulder too long and sitting too close during movie nights. The therapist wrote down every word and sent it straight to CPS as required by his treatment plan. Lauren's parents showed up at my lawyer's office the next week with their own attorney and a check. They wanted to settle Tommy's civil claim quietly without any court filing that would make headlines. The settlement papers guaranteed Tommy would have therapy paid through age 21 with no limits on sessions. Their lawyer made us sign papers saying we couldn't talk about the money to anyone ever. Lauren's lawyer stumbling through explanations about the phone evidence while she sits there touching her face seems like such a calculated performance. Makes me wonder if they rehearsed this whole nervous act beforehand to gain sympathy from the judge during the hearing. My son went back to the school with a safety plan the counselor helped us write. Kids whispered when he walked down the halls and some moved away from him at lunch. We practiced breathing exercises in the car before school, but some mornings he just sat there shaking. I'd have to call him in sick and we'd try again the next day. The prosecutor called me into her office to show me what they'd found in Lauren's sealed therapy records. 3 other kids from her past had made reports that got buried by different therapists. She withdrew the plea deal right there and said they were adding charges for each prior victim. Casey sat me down in her office with coffee and warned me what was coming. Lauren's defense attorney would attack everything about my military service and how I raised my son. We started doing practice sessions where Casey grilled me like I was on the witness stand. She made me answer the same questions over and over until I could stay calm no matter what she asked. Tommy's foster family sent updates through CPS saying he was doing better each week. He needed therapy twice a week and still had nightmares, but they were committed to keeping him. They told the social worker they'd adopt him if Conrad's rights got terminated completely. My son started his community service at the domestic violence shelter downtown. He helped sort donations and clean the playroom where kids stayed while their moms met with counselors. The coordinator said working there seemed to help him understand he wasn't alone in what happened. Other kids had been hurt too, and seeing them heal helped him believe he could heal. I sat at my kitchen table after the boys went to bed surrounded by stacks of papers. Legal bills from Casey that ate up my savings and therapy schedules for both boys. Court dates circled on the calendar and CPS meeting notes scattered everywhere. The case would drag on for months more with depositions and hearings and evaluations. But tonight my son was sleeping in his bed down the hall instead of juvenile detention. Tommy was safe with people who protected him instead of the house where nobody believed him. That had to be enough for now because it was all we had while we waited for the system to work. Thanks for letting me wonder along with you all today. It really makes you look at things a little differently. Until next time. And if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.